Phoenix Nights. Chapter 1307. No benefits? This is not something you should worry about. After a cold snort, Yang Chenong said without changing his expression. Since he wanted to lead all the Han people to the peak of the world, he was destined to walk on a pile of bones. If he was afraid of rumors, then he might as well not do anything. But since he was going to do it, he had to do it to the best of his ability. He had to make all the enemies feel fear from the bottom of their hearts the moment they heard his name. Only by doing so could he achieve the best results with the least number of casualties. Ba Daojiang, what are you waiting for? Yes. With a loud shout, a fast horse suddenly rushed out of the army and rushed straight towards Hardenbarter, who was standing beside the carriage with a pale face. Protect His Majesty! The 200 most loyal guards shouted and wanted to stop Ba Daojiang, but before they could do anything, another burst of gunfire sounded. The 200 cavalrymen didn't even have time to rush out before they fell off their horses one by one. It was also at this time that Ba Daojiang rushed past them. His sharp saber fell down, and a big head flew up. Hardenbarter's eyes were wide open as his head was separated from his body. Even when he died, he didn't think that the 5-star army would really take his life. He was the ruler of a country. As soon as Hardenbarter died, the remaining 1,000 or so cavalrymen trembled all over. They didn't know what would happen to them. Beta Persei rode to Yang Chendong's side and asked carefully, "Young master, I'll leave the rest to you," Yang Chendong said with waning interest. Hardenbarter was already dead, so he naturally didn't care about the others. After saying this, under the lead of the 200 Black Knight Dragon Guards, he slowly returned to where he came from. Yes. Beta Persei respectfully sent off Yang Chendong. When his arm fell, he looked back at the Turpan soldiers kneeling on the ground. They were so scared that they didn't know what to do. He slowly said, "If you want to live, kill all the people in the carriage. Otherwise, die. As for the other Black Knights and Dragon Guards, after they are done with the development, they will set up an observatory. We must let others know the consequences of going against our 5-star army." This meant that they couldn't let Hardenbarter's family go. Although they were mostly women and children, they were also a scourge. If they stayed, who knows what would happen when the 3 princes grow up. If they didn't remove the roots, they would grow again when the spring breeze. Although this was a bit cruel, for the sake of the overall situation, they had to do it. Of course, the Black Knight Dragon Guards were not interested in doing such dirty work. They did not want to attack unarmed people. Fortunately, with these surrendered soldiers, they could do such a thing. They could also use them as proof of their allegiance to seize the right to live. Hardenbarter was dead, so his family naturally didn't pose any threat. In order to survive, the more than 1,000 cavalrymen pounced on the carriages like a pack of wolves. Then, another massacre took place. Yang Chendong, who had already gone far away, had a cold expression on his face. He didn't know if what he was doing was right or wrong. Sometimes, he would be soft-hearted. But when he thought about how if it wasn't for his appearance, the Han people would first be enslaved by the Jianghu slaves hundreds of years later and become low-class people like slaves, then they would have to face the invasion of the Western powers, especially the invasion of the Japanese, who knew how many innocent people were killed. In contrast, in order to prevent the Han people from being enslaved and bullied, he was willing to be a villain and a demon king. "Forget it, if I don't go to hell, who will? If there is karma, then come at me," Yang Chendong muttered in his heart as he rode away. Next to Boston Lake, statues were soon erected. Not only were there heads of women and children, but even the head of King Hardenbarter was among them. When the news spread out, it immediately caused an uproar. Countless people were furious and scolded the 5-star army for being too cruel. At the same time, they were also worried about their future. If they didn't surrender, would they have the same ending? After setting up the statues, Beta Persei said to the surviving Turpan cavalrymen, "This is what you did. It has nothing to do with our 5-star army, do you understand?" Yes, we killed these people." The captives who survived with great difficulty immediately knelt on the ground and swore. They had already taken that step and had no other choice. Very good. Beta Persei nodded in satisfaction. Although it was more or less a lie, these people really weren't killed by them. This was the truth. Hardened Barter was dead. With the help of Daichin and Thorgen, the city was quickly breached by the five-star army and public security began to stabilize. The granaries were opened and the people could go home. For a time, the people on the streets were grateful to the five-star army and Bugnam of Gojoseon. To the commoners, whoever allowed them to survive was their benefactor. As for the people who were loyal to the king, in the face of life and death, how many of them could be Wen Tianxiang? The news that Hardened Barter died next to Boston Lake was quickly spread. This was naturally Yang Chendong's idea. He didn't need to hide anything, and since he did it, he wasn't afraid of others talking about it. At the same time, he also wanted to see how Daichin and Zhenzhou would perform. When the news came, the two generals immediately closed their houses and didn't come out. It didn't take long for the two resignations to be sent to the military camp of the five-star army and placed in front of Yang Chidong. Young master, you don't know what's good for you. Beta Persei's eyes flashed with anger when he saw that Daichin and Zhenzhou chose to resign from their current positions and would rather be a normal person than work for the five-star army and Yang Xie. In Beta Persei's eyes, it was their fortune that the young master was willing to use them. Now that he publicly refused, he didn't want face. It had to be said that at this moment, in Beta Persei's eyes, Yang Chendong's wishes were the most important. This was because he went from not being able to eat or sleep well to where he was today. And all of this was brought to him by Yang Chendong. He was his benefactor in this life. In comparison, Yang Chendong wasn't angry. Instead, he looked at the two resignations with satisfaction and said, "Not bad, these two are loyal and can be used. How about this? Order all the five-star army soldiers in the city to retreat to the outer city." Outside Daichin's house, Yang Chendong had already changed into a green robe. Beside him was the black cavalry. They didn't wear armor, but only ordinary people's clothes. They just stood there like this, waiting for the master of the house to appear. Not long later, the house door opened. Daichin, with bloodshot eyes, brought a group of servants out and knelt in front of Yang Chendong. It could be seen that Daichin's expression wasn't good. He knew that the king was dead, and even his family wasn't released. In his eyes, the five-star army's actions were too cruel. He really couldn't imagine that this was done by the Han people who were taught by Confucianism. What was the difference between this and the Mongolian great Khan Kublai? With such a knot in his heart, Daichin obviously couldn't risk his life. He was already prepared to hand over all his power and become an ordinary person. But he didn't expect that Bugnam of Gojoseon didn't have the intention to let him go. He actually brought people to his house. Was he going to hide his bow after the birds had flown away? With such doubts, and with the determination to die, Daichin led a group of people in the mansion to kneel in front of Yang Chendong, putting on a look of absolute determination. "Take the people away." With regards to Daichin's actions, Yang Chendong didn't care at all. His face didn't show any expression, and after saying this sentence, he turned around and left. Very quickly, two black cavalry walked up and carried Daichin, letting him follow in the group. As for his family members who were kneeling on the street, no one cared about them. Daichin didn't know what they were going to do. He used his expression to suppress the cries and screams of his family members, and just like that, he followed behind Yang Chendong into Foreshore City. Not long later, he saw Gejener also being brought over. He was also alone, and was sent into the group. The two of them walked together, and quickly exchanged glances. After seeing the confusion in each other's eyes, they simply let go of the doubts in their hearts, and followed behind Yang Chendong. They wanted to see what kind of tricks Bugnam of Gojoseon was going to play. The outer city was already occupied by the five-star army, but the soldiers in the inner city had already retreated. The security of the inner city also fell into chaos because of this. Although they didn't know why the five-star army retreated, but to many people, there was no order and law in the inner city, and this gave some people an opportunity. This was especially true for those who were lazy and gluttonous. They saw an opportunity and hope. A city without order and law, a city without supervision, caused the evilest nature in people's hearts to be exposed. When Yang Chendong and his group entered the inner city, they could see smashing and looting happening everywhere. On the streets, it was common to see people fighting to death and being crippled. A person from a rich family or a merchant became the main target of looting. Some young girls also became the existence of delicious cakes, attracting countless people's attention and looting. After just walking through one street, they saw over a dozen commoners lying on the ground in pools of blood. They saw 2 shops being smashed and burned. They saw 3 women being openly carried on the shoulders of evil men as they left while laughing loudly. If it wasn't for the fact that Yang Chendong and his group had too many people, and that they were all valiant, their embroidered clothes would have become the target of looting. Chapter 1308. How did this happen? In the group, Daiqin and Zhenjia's expressions changed greatly. They couldn't believe this scene. When they saw more and more Turpan civilians dying on the streets, their hearts ached and they couldn't believe it. Yang Chendong, who had been waiting for the reaction of the two, finally spoke at this time. Look, this is the true evil in the hearts of humans. This king knows that Hardenbarter's death, including his entire family, was in the hands of the surrendered soldiers. You are angry, even angry. But this king wants to say that they are humans. Are these ordinary citizens not humans? If the 2 of you are only angry because of the destruction of the Turpan royal family, then this king can let the people kill each other and reveal their ugliest side. This way, it won't be long before this Kali city becomes an empty city. Is this what you, who claim to be good officials for the people, want to see? This question made Daiqin and Zhenjiao speechless. They finally understood what Yang Chendong meant. If they didn't submit, then he would let this matter continue to develop. At that time, all the civilians of Turpan would be destroyed because of the internal strife. As Turpan people, as people who had lived here for generations, both Daiqin and Zhenjiao didn't want to see such a thing happen. That way, they wouldn't be able to face their ancestors and ancestors after death. But if they submitted to Yang Chendong and worked for him because of this, they were somewhat unwilling. For a long time, the two didn't speak. Yang Chendong also didn't have the intention to rush them. There were some things that had to be thought through by others. If he blindly interfered, even if he could be used, it might not be sincere. Since they needed time to think it through, he would give them time. After an unknown period of time, Daiqin saw another family being robbed by bandits on the street. An old man was stabbed and fell on the street because he chased after the bandits. Daiqin finally couldn't bear it anymore. Wu Nan King, we have already surrendered. They are already your people. How can you watch them die and not save them? Daiqin was angry. This was what Yang Chendong wanted to see. He laughed and said, Surrendered? Why do I see them returning to their own residences and not caring about the outside world? He was saying that Daiqin and Zhenjia's actions made him angry. At that moment, Daiqin could only speak in a short breath. But we also did our best for the 5-star army to enter Kylasi. No one will deny your contributions and efforts. But what this prince wants is for you to truly submit to me. Yang Chendong's voice suddenly became stern. These civilians weren't true Han people. If someone started it, they would pick up their weapons and become enemies with the 5-star army. Even so, if one more died, he wouldn't feel the slightest bit of heartache. Only those who truly submitted to Yang Xia were his people. Only then would they receive his care and care. Only then would he have the obligation to protect their rights. Yang Chendong wasn't in a hurry, but Daiqin and Zhenjiao couldn't do that. If they just stayed in their residences and didn't care about the outside world, maybe they could pretend to be deaf and blind. But since they saw it with their own eyes, they couldn't just ignore it. Bugnam of Gojoseon, we submit. We take back our resignation. We are willing to work for Yang Xia and the 5-star army. Finally, the cruelty of reality forced the two to change their minds. They had to do their best to protect the civilians of Turfan. Yang Chendong was waiting for these words. He stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at Daiqin and Zhenjiao. Very good, you made the right choice. Now I will give you the authority to send soldiers into the city. When the time comes, I will leave behind 10,000 five-star army to help you restore law and order. After that, there will be other non-human civilians coming in. The Turfan civilians here will also leave their homeland and live in other places. But I can guarantee that as long as they sincerely submit, not only will their safety be guaranteed, their future lives will be better than now. Even the descendants of the two generals will thank you for your actions today. Yang Qindong had never been stingy with his help to the civilians who truly submitted to him. When they went to a new place, they would be given enough land to live on and start a new life. At that time, there would be no more war, no more fear. There would only be hope and longing for a limitless life. This point was already felt by the countless people who submitted to Yang Xie. After finally convincing Daiqin and Gezhener, Yang Qindong handed over the task of reorganizing the Turpan kingdom to the two of them. Based on the principle of using the barbarians to control the barbarians, no one understood the situation here better than them. Naturally, no one could do a better job than them. Although Turfan was destroyed, Yang Qindong's footsteps would not stop. He brought the five-star army and continued to move deeper into Ili. His target was the entire world. Just like Yang Xie had the Security Bureau and the Central Intelligence Bureau, Ming also had the Imperial Secret Service and the East Faction Guards. While Yang Qindong was leading the five-star army to slaughter in all directions in Ili, shaking the prestige of our Han people, information regarding that place was also being sent back to the hands of Marquis Wuqing Shiheng. Every time he saw the news of the five-star army winning another battle, Shiheng's face would turn ugly. If not for the fact that he understood Yang Qindong, he would have doubted the authenticity of the news. The great Ming dynasty emphasized culture and suppressed martial arts. The status of martial artists was never high. Actually, it was not only the great Ming dynasty that was like this. Ever since An Lushan started a rebellion, the Song dynasty was like this, and now, the Ming dynasty was like this as well. Even though the Zhao clan and the Zhu clan started a rebellion through martial arts, this did not stop them from getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. That's right, they got rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. In order to prevent the same thing from happening to them, the great Ming dynasty had many similarities with the Song dynasty. For example, in order to prevent the martial artists from gaining power, the emperor would work together with the civil officials to suppress them. This resulted in the saying that the emperor and the scholar officials ruled the world together. As a result, the strength of the country would slowly decline, and in the end, it would be replaced by other dynasties. All of this was just to say one thing. Under such a policy, it was difficult for the martial artists to achieve anything. Shiheng lived in this era and had seen too many cases of civil officials suppressing the martial artists. Even though he was Wuqing Hao, it was still difficult for him to enter the eyes of many people. In their eyes, he was just a martial artist. There were many things that happened from time to time. For example, the provision of provisions was always a little late. It seemed that if they did not do so, it would be difficult to show the importance of the civil officials. At the Wan Quan division, the ration officer once again came to Shiheng to complain about the lack of rations. When he sent people to rush them, they were deliberately making things difficult for them. There were even rumors that they had eaten so much, yet they still hadn't won a single battle, and that they were truly a bunch of trash. Enough. Shiheng sat in the main hall of the residence with an unhappy expression. Marquis will personally report this matter. The provisions will be sent soon. His eyes weren't very big, but they were somewhat sinister, as he fiercely glared at the fodder manager. Then, he waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. The warning in that glance was very obvious. It was probably to tell the provision officer that some words could not be said casually. If he dared to disturb the morale of his troops, he would be punished by military law. After receiving the warning, the fodder officer immediately retreated while trembling. Just as he left, an order was sent out to invite General Fang Dingshan to the residence for a discussion. Not long after, General Fang Dingshan, who was dressed in armor and somewhat travel-worn, arrived at the Wuqing Hao residence. In the study, he saw Shi Heng waiting for him. "Marquis, you called for me?" When Fang Dingshan saw Shi Heng, he greeted him. Then, he found a place to sit and drank the cup of warm tea in front of him. One was a close official of the emperor, while the other was a marquis personally conferred by the emperor. The two of them worked together in the frontier fortress. As time passed, their relationship became much closer. Just from Fang Dingshan's behavior after entering the study, it could be seen. Shi Heng looked at Fang Dingshan with a face full of smiles. He also looked at his casual actions. This person had some ability, especially in the area of training soldiers. Under his leadership, the Liaodong Iron Cavalry's battle strength was constantly increasing. The number of soldiers also increased. It had increased from the previous 70,000 to the current 100,000. Naturally, this was tacitly approved by the emperor. At the same time, it was also fully supported by Shi Heng. After seeing the five-star army's cavalry continue to dominate the world, the importance of cavalry became more and more obvious. Not only did the Liaodong Iron Cavalry increase in numbers, their battle strength was also not bad. Shi Heng went to check on them before. Whether it was their military strength, military discipline, or battle strength, they all shocked him. He had seen with his own eyes a group of 200 Liaodong Iron Cavalry charge into a group of 3,000 infantrymen. When the wooden swords clashed, the wind swept away the clouds and defeated the enemy. With such a strong army, even if they were to face the famous cavalry of the five-star army, they wouldn't be afraid. With this confidence, Shi Heng had called the other party over in the hopes of winning a battle. This way, he wouldn't be underestimated by the civil officials in charge of the provisions behind him. After watching Fang Dingshan drink 2 full bowls of tea, Shi Heng finally opened his mouth. He first repeated what the provisions officer said, then sat down to see Fang Dingshan's reaction. "Oh, someone actually said that. Humph. They really can open their mouths. The emperor didn't even order us to fight against the five-star army. They are jumping up and down like monkeys." Fang Dingshan was after all a martial artist, so when he spoke, he did not have too many taboos. Chapter 1309. "That's right," Shi Heng said empathetically. "Those people in Jingdo are already afraid of the powerful Yang Chindong. Especially after the previous defeat, some people are as timid as mice. They keep telling His Majesty not to provoke Bugnam of Gojoseon. They even say that until now, Bugnam of Gojoseon hasn't done anything harmful to the great Ming. It's really funny when you think about it. They don't make a move because they have too many targets to conquer. They don't have the time to do anything. That's right. Those scholars who only know how to use literature and martial arts are simply harming the country," Fang Dingshan said in agreement. He also didn't agree with these people's words. What Bugnam of Gojoseon still had the great Ming in his heart, and didn't dare to make a move against the great Ming. In his eyes, it was nonsense. Yang Chindong didn't make a move now because he didn't think the time was right. Once he did make a move, it would be like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. No one would be able to stop him, right? Scholars are harming the country. Shi Heng also let out a long sigh. After seeing Fang Dingshan's anger, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "It's because of this that we can't let this kind of thing happen. We can't just stand by and watch the five-star army grow. I don't dare to say anything about other places, but at the very least, we can't allow this kind of thing to happen in our territory." "Oh? Marquis is preparing to make a move?" Fang Dingshan also understood the meaning behind these words and asked with some excitement. "Yes, he's going to make a move. We can't just stand by and watch the five-star army's provisions walk past Tulu City every day and do nothing," Shi Heng said with a righteous expression. Fang Dingshan first nodded in agreement, but then quickly shook his head. "But His Majesty didn't give an order." This order was referring to the order to openly attack the five-star army. Speaking of which, ever since they failed to attack the beginning city, Baiming had become much more well-behaved. At the very least, they no longer openly became enemies with the five-star army. In the words of those civil officials, since Bugnam of Gojoseon was so belligerent, then let him fight others. As long as he did not find trouble with Ming, they would let him do as he pleased. Swords had no eyes on the battlefield. Once they lost a battle and Yang Chendong died on the battlefield, the so-called five-star army would also collapse. At that time, Ming would send out troops to suppress them, and they would be able to win the battle. In the end, this was the mentality of an ostrich. Since he couldn't beat them, he placed his hopes on others. Since the five-star army did not take the initiative to provoke the Ming army, they did not need to make a move. Everyone could live peacefully for a few days. Naturally, Su Yozhen's contribution was not lacking in this. Yang Chendong needed to conquer the grasslands and the inner regions to increase the five-star army's influence and territory. If Ming made a ruckus at this time, it would be very inconvenient. This was why Su Yozhen ordered the Ming army to not make a move. Now, it seemed that the effect was not bad. At least some civil officials believed it. Ming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, also did the same. However, Shiheng, who had been laughed at for asking for provisions, felt a bit of anger in his heart. He decided to make a move and fight with the five-star army to find trouble with them. It's fine. It's true that the emperor didn't give any orders, so we don't need to use our own names. We can just pretend to be bandits and remnants of the grasslands. Marquis has already thought about it. We can split up into smaller groups and use small groups to disturb the enemy's supply lines. This way, we won't have to worry about being reprimanded. We can also train our soldiers and steal some provisions for our own use. It's killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The more Shiheng spoke, the more excited he became. It was as if countless benefits were already waiting for him. At this moment, Fan Dingshan's eyes became brighter and brighter. Disguising themselves as bandits and forces opposing the five-star army to disturb them was indeed a good move. This way, they wouldn't have to worry about the emperor's reprimand. If they fought more battles, they would be able to accumulate small victories. It was truly wonderful. He was so excited that he immediately stood up and said, "That's great. I'll go arrange it right away." "Good. General Fang, you've worked hard. However, you must remember not to send too many people at once. After all, there aren't many forces opposing the five-star army in this area," Shiheng carefully warned. He said this because he had another purpose. That was to send out a small number of cavalry at once. Even if one of the groups failed or were completely wiped out, it wouldn't affect the overall situation of the Liaodong cavalry. Fan Dingshan listened and nodded repeatedly. Then, the two discussed for a long time and discussed some specific issues. In the end, when both sides felt that there were no problems, they looked at each other and laughed. Under the protection of more than 100 five-star army soldiers, a group of more than 10 horse carriages escorted the provisions from the first city to the Shajing city. Along with this group, there were also 200 people of different races. There were men and women, old and young. They either brought their families or supported the carriages as they walked. Upon closer inspection, everyone's eyes were filled with yearning for a better future. These 200 people had already obtained identification cards issued by the Logistics Command. With this, they could each receive 10 mu of rations and farming tools according to the number of people they had when they arrived at the new place. They could also be allocated a house and a sum of money that was enough for them to settle down in their new home. The future place would also be their new starting point. As long as they were willing to work hard, with provisions and money, how could their life not be good? Although they had to leave their hometown because of this, compared to living a stable and prosperous life, those were nothing. The 200 people were even chatting and laughing along the way. Although everyone came from different ethnic groups and regions, it was very likely that they would be living together in the future. Thus, they slowly became familiar with each other along the way. For the behavior of the people, the 100 five-star army soldiers didn't do anything to stop them. The higher-ups had already said that as long as the people were obedient, they would be convenient along the way. After all, the army would still need to rely on these people to provide the provisions needed by the army in the future. It was a bit inappropriate to say that they were the parents of food and clothing, but it was not too much to say that they depended on each other. In this way, the people helped to drive the carriages. When the road was smooth, they would sit in the carriages to rest for a while. From time to time, when they encountered water sources, the soldiers and civilians would stop to fetch water and interact with each other. It was a picture of harmony. However, all of this beauty was suddenly cut short by a series of rumbling sounds that came from the ground. As the captain of the team, Bien Bin, the company commander, pulled out his sword when he heard the rumbling sound, then he shouted, "Soldiers, prepare for war, people hide beside the carriages." It was no wonder that Bien Bin was so nervous. The area he was walking in was far from the first city in Shaojing City, so there would often be bandits in this area. Although relying on the powerful reputation of the 5-star army, ordinary people didn't dare to find trouble with them casually. However, there were still some desperados among them, and there were still some people who were willing to take the risk. With the idea that a villain would not make a big mistake, Bien Bin gathered the soldiers together. Among them, there were 50 soldiers who had war horses. At this time, they were sharpening their swords with the company commander, ready to deal with any unexpected situation. On the other hand, the people didn't seem to be nervous. They were all people who had been conquered by the 5-star army. They had seen the power of the 5-star army, and didn't think that anyone would dare to challenge the authority of the 5-star army. Therefore, even if they heard the rumbling sound of the war horses, there were still some people who looked forward, wanting to see who was so bold, and then watch these people who appeared leave with their tails between their legs. The 5-star flag was fluttering in the breeze, like a command flag standing on the mule carriage. It also proved the identity of this supply team to the outside world. Many times, the appearance of the 5-star flag was like a huge and unstoppable city wall, causing some bandits to forget and retreat. After all, the strength of the 5-star army was too strong. It was so strong that many small tribes who had not yet surrendered did not have any intention to resist. This was also the biggest reliance and confidence in the eyes of the people. Report: a group of 200 Mongolian bandits appeared in front of us. They are rushing towards us quickly. They are less than 5 miles away. The scout cavalry in charge of guarding the front rushed back and shouted loudly as he rushed back. Mongolian bandits? When he heard this name, Bien Bin's face became a little ugly. The so-called Mongolian bandits referred to those small Mongolian groups who were not willing to surrender. They were usually small in number, and their battle strength was not strong. When faced with the 5-star army, they would avoid them. However, when faced with the 5-star army, they would suddenly attack like a mad dog. These bandits could not be killed, and they could not be killed. They were the most troublesome thing to deal with. Who would have thought that he would encounter them here today? Bien Bin felt a headache coming on, and he hurriedly started to get into formation. 50 cavalry soldiers were ready to fight at any time, and 50 infantry soldiers were ready to shoot from afar. Bien Bin wanted to use this method to warn those bandits that he was not someone to be trifled with. He hoped that this method could scare them away, and make them stay away from him, and avoid a possible disaster. Bien Bin was a little nervous, but he did not show it on his face. Instead, he confidently said to his soldiers and the people around the carriage, "Everyone, don't worry. Even if the bandits come, they will not easily make a move. For these carriages of provisions, the price they have to pay is not proportional to the price they will get." Everyone thought that the bandits who came were after the provisions. However, they did not know that this time, it was not the bandits who came, but the valiant Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Bai Ming had spent a lot of money to build this cavalry. Chapter 13:10. It was only the distance of a 5-star army. For a real cavalry, it would only take half the time it takes to drink a cup of tea to arrive. When both sides could clearly see each other's formation, Bien Bin, as the company commander, took the initiative to move forward and shouted, "We are the new 5-star army's new army, 1012th Division, 101st Division, 7th Regiment, 2nd Battalion, 5th Company. We were ordered to escort the supplies to the army in front. It's better for you to move aside. Otherwise, if you attract the wrath of the 5-star army, it's not something you can." After revealing his identity, before he could finish his warning, an arrow pierced through the air and hit Bien Bin's chest, where his heart was located. With just one arrow, Bien Bin's shouting stopped abruptly. His body trembled a little, and with an unwilling expression, he fell from his horse. Bien Bin was dead. The sudden death of a company commander shocked everyone. The 200 civilians let out a cry of alarm and started to flee in all directions. Obviously, this scene had exceeded their psychological defenses. They did not expect the bandits to be so arrogant, to actually kill someone without saying a word. Furthermore, the person they killed was a captain of the 5-star army. This was equivalent to drawing a grudge that would not end until one of them was dead. Presumably, once this matter was spread, the headquarters of the 5-star army would definitely not let this matter rest. However, that was all for later. The most important thing now was to survive. Otherwise, they would definitely not be able to witness this scene. The civilians began to run in all directions in panic. However, the soldiers could not run away. They still needed to avenge their company commander. After hesitating for a moment, both the cavalry and the infantry launched their own counterattack. Thus, a small-scale battle began. Unfortunately, the cavalry needed some distance to launch an attack, while the infantry's range was not enough. In just the first clash, the 5-star army suffered a great loss. More than 30 soldiers died on the spot. The 200 cavalry of the bandits did not feel satisfied after the first charge. What they wanted was to kill all of them, and not leave a single one alive. Therefore, they quickly mobilized the horses to charge again. After repeating this process 4 times, there was not a single 5-star army soldier who could breathe beside the carriage. All of their brothers in the company had been killed. Under the surprise attack, only 2 of the Ming bandits' 200 cavalrymen were killed, and only a dozen were injured. Seeing this result, the leading Liaodong cavalry general was very satisfied. He laughed and said, "1 team, stay behind to escort the carriages. 2, chase after the fleeing civilians. Remember, don't leave a single one alive. Don't leave a single one alive." The cavalry of the second group, which had close to 100 men, responded in unison before charging off in all directions. Not long after, cries for help could be heard from afar, but they soon disappeared from the grassland. 100 soldiers and 200 civilians were all dead. Not a single person was left alive. And this was just the beginning. In just 4 days, more than 10 companies and more than 2,000 civilians had been killed, and more than 200 carriages of provisions had been stolen. The news was quickly discovered by the scouts of the 5-star army, and they reported back one by one. In the headquarters of the new army, Tiger's man's eyes were burning with anger. Looking at the bad news that came one after another, his face was as gloomy as water. In front of him, the 3 company commanders were also unhappy. They clenched their fists and looked like they wanted to eat someone. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, Tiger's man looked at the 3 commanders and asked, "Tell me what you think." The commander of the 101st Army, Lu Jue, who had the most experience, was the first to speak. "This is clearly a military operation against our 5-star army. Someone is playing with fire. We can't just sit here and wait for death. We must find the culprit and kill one as a warning to the others. Let's establish Jingguan Temple to scare everyone." His voice was filled with murderous intent. Lu Jue was really angry. More than half of the soldiers that were killed were from the 101st Army. As a commander, how could he not be angry when he saw his soldiers die without knowing who the culprit was? "That's right. We must investigate. After we find the culprit, we must exterminate his entire family as a warning to the others." The commander of the 102nd Army, He Chong, also spoke. His aura was not any weaker than Lu Jue's. On the other hand, the commander of the 103rd Army, Qin Feng, didn't speak immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and thought about something. His silence made Tiger's man look at him. "Commander Qin, what do you think?" Qin Feng only woke up when his name was called. He raised his head and said his opinion. "Commander Tiger, from what I see, this isn't the work of normal bandits. I've asked the scouts who went to investigate the scene. They said that most of our soldiers were killed in one hit. I really can't think of anyone who could do this. as expected of someone who worked in the Ministry of Public Security in Crimson City. He could see the essence of the matter at a glance. Tiger's man nodded in satisfaction. That's right. What Commander Chin said is right. If it were normal bandits, it would be impossible to kill all of them. Even if our 5-star army can't defeat them, at least 10 to 20% of our soldiers should be able to escape. However, none of them escaped. This is enough to prove that our opponent is a powerful and well-organized organization. Normal bandits can't be compared to them. The moment Tiger's man finished speaking, the commander of the 101st Army, Lu Jua, blurted out, "Does this mean that the Walla army has returned?" The news of Yesen leading 70,000 Walla army and escaping from the inner district had already been spread back. Yang Qindong had even sent a telegram to remind everyone to be careful of the enemy's sudden attack. After all, he couldn't be sure if Yesen was really afraid of him or not. Lu Jua's analysis was reasonable. It can't be them. Commander Qin Feng directly denied it. Why? Lu Jua asked in confusion. It's very simple. This isn't the style of the Walla cavalry. If they appeared here, 70,000 of them would have already caused a commotion. Only then would they be able to attract more Walla cavalry to join them. Why would they do something so cowardly? Just for a small amount of food, the sacrifice is not proportional to the gain. Qin Feng said in a very confident tone. Less than 200 carriages of food was really not much use to a 70,000 Walla cavalry. He even had a feeling that the real target of the attacker wasn't the food. It was just something they did along the way. Qin Feng's words made Lu Jua fall into deep thought. He didn't say anything else. On the other hand, the commander of the 102nd Army, He Chong, suddenly thought of something and said, "If it's not the Wara cavalry, could it be the Ming army?" It wasn't strange for He Chong to say this. In his opinion, the only powerful army in the area was the Ming army. But did they have the guts to do so? Qin Feng didn't say anything. Although he thought so, he didn't have any evidence. But when it came to military matters like this, if it wasn't handled well, it could lead to big problems. Think about it. If it wasn't the Ming army who did it, and they really did fight the Ming army, what would the result be? The person who actually did it would probably wake up laughing in his sleep. Investigate. In the end, it was Tiger's man who made the decision. Send more cavalry scouts. If one team isn't enough, then send 2. If 2 teams aren't enough, then send 5 or 10 teams. In short, we have to find them and surround them. We need solid evidence. After the meeting ended, all the cavalry scouts in the new army were sent out. Not only that, Yang Si from the logistics headquarters had also called over the cavalry scout division that was currently in training. This was a cavalry scout division that he was currently training, and the first commander of the scout division was the chief scout instructor Su Yunxing, whom he had spent a great deal of effort to invite from Crimson City. Su Yunxing was the first recon company commander and recon battalion commander of the 5-star army. He was also a person who was registered with Yang Qindong. Later on, because of his outstanding strength, he was sent to Resin City to teach the Cold Front soldiers. Over the years, he had taught so many students that even he couldn't remember how many there were. However, he liked the feeling of fighting and killing. This time, Yang Si had spent a lot of effort to invite Yang Si, who had stayed in Resin City, to the logistics headquarters. According to his promise, as long as Su Yunxing performed well, he would definitely have the opportunity to kill enemies on the battlefield. This time, more than 10 companies of soldiers were killed, 2,000 to 3,000 civilians were slaughtered, and 100 to 200 logistics carriages were stolen. This attracted the anger of the new regiment, and also angered Yang Si. After all, the logistics and rations were under his control. Since someone dared to do this, it meant that they didn't put him in their eyes. Therefore, this time, he invited Su Yunxing to come out. There was no need to investigate this matter clearly and obtain evidence. Since there was a battle to fight, Su Yunxing did not decline at all. He quickly gathered the only 2,000 scouts in his hands. Although it was a division-level unit, scouts were not easy to find. Not all soldiers who could kill enemies could be good scouts. In accordance with the principle of better to have nothing than to have something substandard, only these 2,000 people were selected from the hundreds of soldiers in the logistics headquarters. However, these 2,000 people were indeed outstanding people. It was not an exaggeration to say that after a little training, they were not inferior to the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. In fact, they were even better in some aspects. In the end, Su Yunxing trained these 2,000 people as scout instructors. He was counting on these people to be successful in the future and train and bring out more outstanding scouts. Now that he had an order, Su Yunxing gathered all these 2,000 people and gathered them on the field of the scouts outside the first city. Su Yunxing, who had the rank of colonel, was riding on a horse majestically. His eyes inspected the 2,000 soldiers who were standing in a mighty posture. "Warriors, we have a mission now. This is also a test of what you've learned recently. People always say that you're a mule or a horse. Now is the time for you to perform. Now I order you to form a team of 10. Choose a captain and vice-captain. Then, the captain will come to me to receive the mission. Now you're dismissed." Chapter 13:11. With 2,000 soldiers in a team of 10, there were a total of 200 teams. With such a large net, Su Yunxing had installed 200 large cameras and 2,000 small cameras between First City and Shaojing City. When the time came, even the slightest movement here would not be able to escape his eyes. He wanted to see who was so bold as to launch a sneak attack on the soldiers of the 5-star army. According to the content taught before, when the 2,000 scouts left First City, it was like a spring breeze and a drizzle. Half of the scouts did not even ride a warhorse. They disguised themselves as ordinary people and mixed into the crowd exiting the city. Then, they disappeared into the vast grassland and did not attract anyone's attention. Even the commander of the new army, Tiger Man, only knew that Yang Si had also sent out scouts. As for how many scouts had been sent out, he had no idea at all. Even the current highest-ranking general in First City did not know the situation, let alone the intelligence personnel of the Ming army in First City. They only knew that the new army had sent out all the scouts. They also knew that these scouts were wearing military uniforms and were looking for something in groups. Later, this news was passed to Marquis Wu Chi-ho Shiheng by means of a messenger pigeon. Soon, the news was passed to General Fang Dingshan, who was waiting for an opportunity to continue to attack the logistics and transport troops of the 5-star army. Fang Dingshan had long expected that the new army would respond. He had also specially formulated a plan for this. He quickly ordered the Liaodong cavalry, who were looking for opportunities everywhere, to stop all military operations and avoid the limelight first. As a result, thousands of scouts of the new army returned without any results. For half a month, they did not find any trace of the enemy and no more transport troops were attacked. They thought that the enemy hiding in the dark had retreated and reported this to the headquarters of the new army. Tiger Man looked at the report that he was not very satisfied with and said with a dark face, "Let's keep an eye on them for a while." Although he also knew that it was very difficult for the cavalry scouts to move continuously, he did not believe that the enemy would take the initiative to retreat after tasting the sweetness without suffering any losses. As a result, the thousands of cavalry scouts continued to run on the grassland. Sometimes, when they passed by some trees and valleys, their every move was clearly seen by the Liaodong cavalry hidden in the forest. However, because the latter were already prepared, they missed several times. The sudden attack seemed to have faded away with the passage of time. Gradually, more and more cavalry scouts began to withdraw from the battlefield and return to the various armies and divisions. After all, those who could become cavalry scouts were the backbone of the army. It was impossible for them to gather together to complete a mission that they didn't know would happen. The earth seemed to have returned to tranquility. When the last batch of cavalry scouts also returned to the first city to rest and reorganize, the northern Ming Liaodong iron cavalry hidden in the dark began to appear in the sky again, like a kite being flown. No! It was the grassland. After a month of ceasefire, the centurion in charge of this attack was named Dong Ping. He was young, bold, and could even be called arrogant. After hiding in the mountains for a month, he suffered a lot. The mosquitoes in the mountains were not to be trifled with. They did not care if you were a general or a soldier. In short, they would bite you when they had the chance. Perhaps it was because of his blood type, Dong Ping was very popular with mosquitoes. When he walked out of the mountains, his exposed skin was covered in red, which greatly affected his glorious image. Dong Ping, who was angry in his heart, naturally couldn't care less about the mosquitoes. He vented all his resentment on the 5-star army. After a month in the mountains, they had basically eaten all the food that could be eaten. Now, they urgently needed to replenish their food. The 5-star army's transport fleet was their best target. Spread the men out and find the closest convict to us. Surround it and destroy it. Dong Ping looked at the 4 cavalry scouts in his hand and gave an order. Then, he led the entire team of 200 cavalrymen and slowly followed behind the scouts. When Dong Ping left the mountain, he was also very cautious. First, he sent out the only 4 cavalry scouts to wear the military uniform of the 5-star army. They went out to scout. After confirming that there was no danger in the surroundings, he led the team out. However, he didn't know that not long after he left the mountains, he was discovered by the scouts from the logistics headquarters. Different from the scouts of the new army, these scouts were not discovered by the scouts of the Ming at all. In addition, some of the soldiers did not ride horses. Instead, they pretended to be wandering civilians and dug holes in the ground. They completely hid themselves in the ground and only occasionally poked their heads out to observe the enemy. Therefore, their disguise was not discovered at all. Previously, as the division commander, Su Yunxing had made a judgment. If the enemy was so hard to find, then they must be hiding somewhere. It was difficult to hide the enemy's army on the flat grassland. Only the trees and valleys could be possible. Thus, he placed some of the scouts near these places where people could easily hide and waited for the enemy to appear. As soon as Dong Ping led his team out, the appearance of his 4 cavalry scouts attracted the attention of the scouts hidden nearby. They were hiding in the holes they dug. When they heard the sound of horse hooves, they quietly poked their heads out. When they saw that it was actually their own comrades, they didn't pay too much attention at first. However, some inexplicable actions of these cavalrymen still aroused their suspicions. When these scouts disguised as 5-star army cavalrymen left a mark on the ground every time they walked, this made the scouts feel that something was wrong. If it was the 5-star army's cavalrymen, they didn't need to do this because this area was now under their control. They didn't need to be so careful. Someone who could do this was very likely to be an enemy. When they thought of the possibility of an enemy appearing, the scouts nearby became excited. There were even some soldiers who wanted to directly take down the cavalryman that appeared in their line of sight and interrogate him. This action was stopped by the leader, Li Yun. Li Yun was originally a company commander of the new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Because he was very unyielding during the investigation, he was chosen by Yang Si and transferred to the Logistics Command. Yang Si, who thought highly of this person, wanted him to learn more skills, so he sent him to Su Yunxing's cavalry division. He was still a company commander there. This time, he was also sent out and became the leader of a 10-man squad. Li Yun's personality was unyielding, but when he did things, he wasn't reckless at all. He was even praised by his division commander, Su Yunxing, who said that he had a calm personality and was more suitable to become an outstanding scout. When he heard his team members say that they should take down the suspicious person, he thought about it and shook his head. This should just be the enemy's outpost. If we take him down, it's very likely that we'll alert the enemy. It's better to wait and see. He continued to mark out the marching route. The main force should follow behind. As the leader, Li Yun rejected the idea. The scouts, who were extremely strict, naturally didn't refute him. They stared closely at the route and waited for the enemy's main force to appear. Hard work paid off. More than 2 hours later, Dong Ping brought 200 Liaodong cavalrymen. They had indeed followed the signs. This was because in their eyes, this route was the safest and least likely to be discovered by the 5-star army. Leader, there are 200 cavalrymen. a scout said with excitement in his eyes. Fortunately, he didn't forget his own situation and lowered his voice. I saw them. How about this? When the enemy cavalrymen pass by, we will follow behind them. You go and find other comrades with war horses nearby and spread the news. This time, we will eat them and capture them. I want to see which faction they belong to. Li Yun's eyes were also filled with excitement. He knew that this time, they had encountered a big fish. Their team would definitely make a great contribution. The well-disguised scouting team did not even notice the enemy's scouts, let alone Dong Ping, who was burning with anxiety and was in a hurry to find the convoy to replenish their supplies. They walked past where Li Yun was hiding, and at their closest, they were less than 5 meters away from each other. When Dong Ping's cavalrymen completely passed by, a soldier appeared like an agile monkey and dashed into the distance, turning into a distant black dot. Captain Li Yun followed behind and led the other members of the squad to carefully tail the target. Dong Ping was completely oblivious to all of this. Around him, more and more scouts received the news and began to surround the place where they were. Especially when Commander Su Yunxing found out that the target was only 200 cavalrymen, he made a bold decision. This time, there was no need for anyone else to act. The scout team alone was enough to complete the mission of capturing the enemy. On the grassland, there was a convoy escorting supplies forward. It was already afternoon and the sun shone on the people's bodies, making them feel comfortable without the slightest bit of heat. If a cold wind blew past, the feeling would be even more comfortable. In this kind of weather, whether it was the 100 soldiers in the troop or the 200 civilians accompanying them, all of them had a happy smile on their faces. Sometimes, they would even perform a military and civilian cooperation, singing a few unique battle songs that belonged to the 5-star army as they walked. It was a scene of unity and joy. The good times didn't last long. This scene was quickly disrupted by the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps. When the company commander heard the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps, he instinctively shouted, "The convoy has stopped. Everyone, prepare for battle." Chapter 13:12. He had long heard that his brother's unit had been completely annihilated by an unknown force. When this company commander had set off, he had been warned repeatedly that if he encountered any danger, he had to protect himself at the first possible moment. Once he confirmed that the enemy was behind him, he had to immediately send out a distress signal. Thus, he immediately set up a defensive formation. The 100 soldiers all held their weapons and stared nervously in the direction of the horse hooves. Not only the soldiers, but even among the 200 civilians, there were a few young and strong men who took the bows and spears handed over by the soldiers of the 5-star army. They were prepared to fight to the death to protect themselves. Only the elderly, children, and women among the civilians had nervous expressions. They didn't know what was waiting for them. While waiting, every minute and second felt like an eternity. Just when everyone felt that their palms were covered in sweat, the enemy cavalry finally appeared. It was a group of 200 cavalry that didn't look like the Ming army's uniform at all. They were like a train speeding along the train tracks. As soon as they appeared, they quickly approached the small transport team. They didn't have any intention of greeting them. The moment they appeared, they were filled with killing intent. "It's the enemy." The company commander quickly made a judgment. Then, he reached into his bosom and a cylinder appeared in his hand. He quickly pulled it open. Tong! A burst of colorful flames soared into the sky after an explosion. This was the signal for help in a critical situation. When the signal was sent out, the company commander's eyes were filled with killing intent. He was already prepared to fight to the death. He was very clear that with the strength of his company, it was impossible for all of them to be a match for the enemy cavalry. However, he couldn't escape. The only thing he could do was to pin down the enemy and wait for reinforcements to arrive. Dong Ping appeared. The distance of 3 kilometers could be said to be covered in the blink of an eye. At this moment, his eyes revealed a look of disdain and complacency. The 5-star army's fighting strength had always been powerful. However, that was only for the elite troops. This new army that was responsible for transporting food hadn't been established for long. Moreover, half of them were cavalry and half of them were foot soldiers. Many of them hadn't even been on the battlefield and hadn't even seen blood before. They only relied on their youthful strength and empty strength. How could such an army be a match for their elite Liaodong iron cavalry? Dong Ping had already started to consider how he was going to eat his fill after plundering the rations of these carriages. He didn't place the 105-star army and 200 commoners in his eyes at all. So what if they were prepared? In the face of his cavalry, wouldn't they have to stretch out their necks and wait to be slaughtered? So what if they sent out a distress signal? In at most a quarter of an hour, Dong Ping was confident that he would be able to kill everyone in front of him, snatch the food, and run away. At that time, in the vast grassland, who could do anything to him? Once he entered the forest, he wouldn't be afraid even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of 5-star soldiers. His body exuded confidence, and his eyes carried a relaxed smile. In Dong Ping's eyes, this battle was as simple and easy as a hunt. He only needed to open his bloody mouth, and victory would be his. The 200 cavalrymen on the other side came closer and closer. When they could clearly see the viciousness of the other side, the company commander gave the order to shoot. At the same time, he brought the remaining 50 cavalrymen and charged forward. If the cavalrymen wanted to display their advantage, they had to charge forward. The man borrowed the horse's momentum and the blade's speed to display the strongest power. If they just stood there and chopped, it would be like not using bean buns as rations and not using the village chief as a leader. Xiu 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 xiu. The arrows came from afar, but Bai Ming's Liaodong iron cavalry were already prepared. They only needed to dodge and block to easily avoid the arrows. Other than one or two unlucky ones who were injured by the arrows, no one died. This was because Bai Ming's Liaodong iron cavalry were well trained, and because the 5-star army had too few archers. There were only 50 of them, so they weren't of much use. Kill! With a loud shout, the company commander swung his saber to the side. Although the situation wasn't good and death was inevitable, he still had to give it his all before he died. Even if he could only kill one person, it would be worth it. Ding ding dang dang. What followed was the sound of weapons clashing. It was like the bell signaling the end of a class. The cavalrymen fell from their horses one after another, just like students jumping out of class. 50 against 200, ordinary soldiers against elite veterans. In just one exchange, more than half of the 5-star army soldiers died. Less than 20 of the original 50 cavalrymen were left. The company commander's left arm already had a bloody wound. Under his strength, the blood flowed even faster, and soon dyed half of his clothes red. He didn't care about this at all. He had already injured an enemy, so what he wanted to do now was to increase his victory and kill 1 or 2 people. It could be considered finding a companion in the afterlife. Kill! After another loud shout, the company commander brandished his saber and charged forward. Beside him were less than 20 cavalrymen who were lucky enough to survive. Kill! Dong Ping was also shocked by the company commander's imposing manner. After the previous round of charging, one of his men was actually killed and 7 others were injured. This result greatly angered him. He was leading the elite cavalrymen that Bai Ming had spent a lot of money to train. The other party was just a young recruit who had undergone a short period of training. Even if there were 100 of them, they shouldn't be exchanged for the life of one of his brothers. Now that one of them had died, he was furious. He felt that his dignity was being challenged. Next, he wanted to carry out the fiercest revenge. He wanted to let these damned 5-star army soldiers know that provoking him wouldn't have a good ending. Under 2 loud shouts, the 2 sides clashed again. What followed was another wave of sword light. More than 10 cavalrymen fell to the ground and were buried here. Ha! A loud laugh came from the company commander's mouth. This time, he finally managed to kill an enemy with his own hands, but the price he paid was a bone-deep wound under his ribs. However, he didn't care anymore. What he wanted was to kill enough people. That way, even if he died, he could look up to the sky and laugh. Dong Ping's expression became even worse. In the second round of charging, although he killed 13 of his opponents, his side had 2 dead and 3 injured. Looking at the cavalryman formation that only had 6 people, he gritted his teeth and said word by word, Kill them all! Don't leave a single one alive! Kill! The other Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen were also full of hatred. The ordinary 5-star army soldiers that they regarded as ants actually dared to fight back. They actually killed 3 of their men and injured several others. This was a disgrace. They had to kill all of their enemies to prove that they were a strong army. Both sides were full of anger. Killing intent filled every part of their body. Everyone knew that they would fight until the end. In the end, only one team would be standing here. And that team must be the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen. Shio shio shio, the sound of air breaking suddenly came from afar. Not far from where the 2 sides were fighting, a team of 10 cavalrymen appeared. They were the scouts that immediately rushed over after receiving the news. This team of 10 had been hiding in the dense forest all this time. According to the military order, they did not have any direct scouting mission. Their most important task was to slow down the enemy's escape once they appeared. After waiting for a month and being bitten countless times by mosquitoes, they finally had the chance to attack. 10 elite veterans that were selected from various armies rushed out. They finally arrived at the battlefield at the last moment. 10 arrows were shot out. They pierced through the air and attacked the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen from the side. Unfortunately, because the distance was too far, the arrows fell to the ground halfway and did not cause any damage to the enemy. Ha! Dong Ping and his subordinates could not help but laugh when they saw this scene. They were surprised by the 5-star army's quick reaction. However, only 10 cavalrymen came. Moreover, they had such poor archery skills. This made them relax. These people were not worthy of being called their opponents. You guys, go and take care of them. After laughing, Dong Ping did not care about these 10 cavalrymen at all. He casually pointed at a squad leader and asked him to lead the team. The squad leader had 9 soldiers under him. He immediately agreed, and the 10 of them, including himself, went to meet the 10 cavalrymen. They smiled and waited for their prey to enter the net. Then, they would show their cruelest side and kill them. Dong Ping was not in a hurry to make a move. He wanted to let these 5-star army soldiers who dared to draw their swords at him see how he would kill them one by one. The feeling of despair must be very fun and interesting. They're here! Facing the 10 Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen who were wearing Mongolian uniforms, the squad leader of the 10 cavalrymen, Zhang Zhou, said softly. When he said this, there was not the slightest trace of nervousness on his face. On the contrary, he looked eager to give it a try. Zhang Zhou used to be a deputy battalion commander in the new Second Army. Although the disciplinary investigation group did not find anything wrong with him, he could not stay in the new Second Army anymore. Therefore, he came to the logistics division and waited to take up a position in another army. In the end, because of his good performance, he caught Su Yunxing's eye and became a soldier in the reconnaissance division. Zhang Zhou, who had been on the battlefield and had seen blood, did not completely change after a period of learning as a reconnaissance division. His personal ability had indeed more than doubled. He had always wanted to show off what he had learned. Now that the opportunity had come, the long-awaited battlefield made his hormones rise. He could not wait to perform well. Chapter 13:13. Zhang Zhou was not the only one who was excited. The 9 squad members beside him were also very excited. Warriors who could become scouts were all veterans who had been through hundreds of battles. They had potential that others did not have. In addition to what they had learned during this period of time, they were eager to perform well and see how much they had improved. The 10 soldiers with different expectations slowly approached. They did not show the slightest bit of fear when facing the 10 enemy cavalrymen. Even though there were close to 200 cavalrymen behind these cavalrymen staring at them like tigers and wolves, they were still fearless. You have some guts, but I don't know if you can maintain your composure under my cavalry sword. Charge! The squad leader yelled and led 9 cavalrymen to charge forward. Although there were only 10 cavalrymen, they still gave off a sense of majesty. Spread out. Facing the cavalrymen who were charging more than 200 meters away, Zhou Hao gave the order the moment the enemy moved. Then, the 10 soldiers separated and each occupied a position within a limited time. It felt like they were fighting alone, but also like some kind of formation. Shoot the arrows! As soon as they finished moving, Zhou Hao shouted. His voice was like the roar of a tiger and the roar of a dragon, spreading far and wide. Dong Ping and the others who were not far away heard it and laughed out loud. The effectiveness of a cavalryman's bow depended on the distance. If the distance was too close, then the bow and arrow would be almost useless. It was all because the enemy was already in front of you while you were raising the bow. How could you block it? This was also the reason why Dong Ping and the others laughed. However, their laughter came to an abrupt stop. They all stood there as if they were frozen. In their line of sight, every single one of the 10 cavalrymen had a trembling arrow resting on their chest. After struggling for a while, the 10 of them fell to the ground one by one like ducks being chased into the water. They actually hit the target. In a short period of time, 10 arrows hit the target. This result was really shocking. Dong Ping and the others were dumbfounded. How could they have known that archery was a necessary skill for a qualified scout? Division Commander Su Yunxing had put in a lot of effort in this regard. After he received the full support of Commander Yang Si, he spent a lot of material and financial resources to finally double the archery skills of the 2,000 scouts under his command. They might not be able to hit every shot, but at such a close distance, hitting the enemy's chest would not be a problem. Just now, the 10 of them had spread out in preparation for the archery. What was different from the past was that these 10 people did not choose the person closest to them when shooting. This was because in many cases, the closer the distance, the higher the accuracy. Humans are alive, but they can move and dodge. It was because of these factors that Su Yunxing's strategy was to shoot at random. Don't think that I will shoot at you just because you are close to me. If you think this way and dodge according to my arrow, then you're making a big mistake and falling into my trap. Because I'm shooting at the person beside you, and the person beside me is shooting at you. In this way, it was really impossible to guard against. A cavalryman could instinctively dodge one person's arrow, but they couldn't dodge multiple people at once. This was why they fell into the trap. This was because their dodging actions were useless. They even got the wrong target, so how could they dodge successfully? Under one shot, the 10 Ming cavalrymen who were not familiar with this strategy all fell to the ground. Perhaps some of them would not die immediately, but they would still be breathing more than they were exhaling. They did not have much time left to live. Yeah! Accompanied by Dong Ping and the others' surprise and confusion, Zhou's 10 people cheered loudly. Speaking of which, they had only tried this strategy on the scarecrow. This was the first time they had actually killed an enemy on the battlefield. They never thought that they would get the jackpot. How could they not be happy? At this moment, only the cheers of Zhou and the others could be heard on the battlefield. Everyone else was stunned in place. They were all shocked by the scene in front of them. The company commander, who only had 5 soldiers with him, seemed to have forgotten his situation. He also forgot the despair in his eyes when he saw that there were only 10 reinforcements. The hope of survival rose in his heart once again. This is courting death. I will kill all of you. I will capture all of you and torture you to death bit by bit. Above. Dong Ping finally reacted. When he saw the 10 cavalrymen on the ground, his whole body emitted a cold aura. In the past, when they were carrying out missions, the mission would be considered a failure if one of them died. But now, 13 of them had died. Even if he killed the 5-star army and the civilians in front of him, he would still be punished when he returned. If he did not do well, he might even be punished and demoted. When he thought of General Fang Dingshan's cruel military law, Dong Ping felt his whole body turn cold. He needed to vent his anger. His target was the 10 5-star army soldiers who suddenly appeared. Under the command of above, 50 cavalrymen walked out in a row. Obviously, After experiencing the failure just now, these Ming army soldiers did not want to fight one-on-one anymore. They wanted to fight with numbers. The 50 cavalrymen slowly came forward and gradually formed their encirclement. It was as if they were saying, "We want to surround you, capture you alive, and slowly torture you to death. This is a competition of numbers." Zhang Zhou looked at the 50 cavalrymen who were gradually approaching and shook his head. Then, he looked back. When he turned back, his eyes were incomparably calm. "Sai, if we really want to compete in numbers, you guys are not a match." As if to prove Zhang Zhou's words, after he finished speaking, more and more black dots appeared behind him. The rumbling sound of horse hooves resounded on the ground again. After the battle just now, more and more cavalrymen from the reconnaissance division had gathered here. 1 squad, 2 squads, 5 squads, 10 squads. In just a short period of time, more and more black dots appeared in all directions. With a rough glance, the number of people was probably more than 500. This sudden change fell into Dong Ping's eyes. In a short period of time, his eyes were constantly changing. He was actually surrounded. This was impossible. Before the battle, his 4 scouts had already scouted the surroundings and did not find any traces of the 5-star army. What was going on? There were too many questions in his heart. Even though Dong Ping wanted to get to the bottom of this, there was no time for him to think about it. They absolutely could not be surrounded. Otherwise, once their identities were exposed, who knew what kind of impact it would bring to northern Ming? The reason why they pretended to be Mongolian cavalrymen was because they did not have the courage to face the 5-star army head-on. "Quick, let's rush out before they surround us!" Dong Ping shouted loudly. Then, he whipped his horse and charged out in the direction where he thought the encirclement was the weakest. "Kill!" Seeing that Dong Ping was about to escape, the first person to react was the company commander, who only had 5 soldiers with him. His own reinforcements had arrived. His morale was greatly boosted. He wanted to avenge his fallen comrades. The company commander and his 5 soldiers moved. But what was strange was that only they moved. The scouts that surrounded them did not attack, nor did they run. Instead, they stayed where they were. Some took out bows and arrows, some took out horse ropes, and all of them leisurely looked at the Ming army who were running in all directions. How to attack the enemy when they were still was one of the training courses for scouts. To them, this was a small matter, as simple as eating and drinking. Dong Ping did not know this. When he saw that the 5-star army soldiers did not stop him, he thought that they were afraid and ran even faster. He urged his horse to gallop, as if he was afraid that the enemy would suddenly turn around and attack him. "Attack!" Someone in the crowd shouted first. Then bows and arrows, horse ropes, and other objects flew out. Some of the bolder ones directly jumped on the Ming soldiers closest to them. It was obvious that they wanted to capture them alive. More and more scouts arrived in the encirclement, but none of them charged forward. They also did not have the intention to swarm forward. Those who came late stood at the periphery. Like this, the encirclement became wider and wider. It gave people a feeling that they could not see the end of the encirclement. Dong Ping's luck was not bad. He dodged the bows and arrows, and even dodged 2 horse ropes. He was running further and further away. However, the soldiers beside him were not so lucky. When the 5-star army soldiers suddenly appeared, and when their numbers increased, their morale dropped to the freezing point. They no longer had the will to fight, and the only thing left was to run away. However, this wish was hard to fulfill. In the process of running away, they were pulled off their horses one after another. Cries of pain could be heard from time to time. "Quick, leave this place! This is a trap!" Dong Ping constantly encouraged himself. Although he did not know how the 5-star army discovered him and formed such an encirclement, he knew one thing. However, there was one thing that he was clear about. If he stayed here, he would likely suffer a fate worse than death. Good luck could not envelop a person forever. Just as Dong Ping was charging outwards on his warhorse under the protection of the remaining 2 bodyguards, his body suddenly turned sluggish. Under the powerful force, his entire body fell off his warhorse. The moment he fell, he did not know when the horse he was riding on had been caught by the horse rope. This was also the reason why he fell from his horse. With a plop, Dong Ping fell from his galloping warhorse. At this moment, Dong Ping felt as if all the bones in his body had been broken. Pain filled his entire body, making him feel as if being able to take a deep breath had become an extravagant hope. Even so, Dong Ping did not forget his situation. If he continued to walk, the pain would be unbearable. However, if he did not leave now, he was afraid that he would suffer 100 or 1,000 times more pain. That was what he could not accept. Chapter 13-14. He forced himself to sit up straight, then held his breath and jogged forward. He wanted to escape from this place. He didn't want to die. Swoosh! Dong Ping, who was running, once again fell to his knees. The first thing he fell to his knees was a lasso rope around his feet. Dong Ping, who had fallen, felt as if his chest had been smashed by a heavy hammer, making it increasingly difficult for him to breathe. However, the hope of survival still made him force himself to sit up. He reached out his hand and touched his ankle. He wanted to untie the lasso rope and regain his freedom. Do you still want to struggle? The person who caught Dong Ping was Captain Li Yun, who had just arrived. He rode on a warhorse and looked at the struggling Dong Ping with great interest. Then, with a smile on his face, he let out a frivolous shout. He dismounted his warhorse and immediately galloped forward with all his might. Dong Ping, who was in the middle of untying the rope, only felt a strong force coming at him. Then, his whole body was pulled away. He followed behind his warhorse and lay flat on the grass, allowing the newly grown weeds to continuously rub against his back. Dong Ping had only been dragged out for 50 meters, but he had already left a long trail of blood on the ground. Dong Ping was already riddled with scars after being tossed around again and again. Blood had dyed his clothes red, especially the part of his back that was in close contact with the grass. His buttocks had long been scraped open, and a layer of skin had already peeled off. Since Dong Ping was captured, none of the 200 Bai Ming cavalrymen escaped. In the end, they were all gathered together. Among them, there were 103 corpses and 97 captives. Division Commander Su Yunxing appeared. With the rank of senior colonel, he appeared very mighty and spirited. Not bad. Looking at the results of the battle, Su Yunxing was very gratified. This was the first time they had taken down all the enemies. More importantly, none of the scouts died. Only 7 of them suffered some light injuries during the battle. They would be good men again after recuperating. Find out who they are. Find out where the other accomplices are hiding. Then, report the results to Logistics Commander Yang. Su Yunxing was no longer interested in looking at the captives. In his eyes, these people no longer posed any threat. There were only 2 outcomes waiting for them. Those who cooperated would live, and those who resisted would die. 97 wounded captives were gathered together. Under the watchful eyes of the cavalry scouts, they knelt in a row, as if they were prisoners waiting to be judged. After Zhang Zhou received the task of interrogation, he strode over to the first northern Ming cavalryman kneeling on the ground with a ghost-headed saber in his hand and asked in a booming voice. Speak, who are you? Humph. Facing Zhang Zhou's question, the cavalryman straightened his neck and raised his head in disdain. If you want to kill me, just kill me. Why are you spouting so much nonsense? At most, I'll be a good man again after 18 years. All right. Zhang Zhou was not angry at such an answer. Instead, he was happy. I like tough guys, but I hope you can continue to be tough. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his saber. When it fell again, a bloody arm flew into the air. With a single slash, he chopped off one of his arms. Blood splattered everywhere, and the intense pain caused the Bai Ming cavalryman to cry out in pain before he fainted. You fainted just like that. Boring. Seeing that the Bai Ming cavalryman in front of him was so weak, Zhang Zhou shook his head in disappointment. He raised his saber again, and a fresh head was separated from the body. Sigh, he's already fainted. There's no need to interrogate him. Why don't we just kill him? Zhang Zhou muttered to himself as he walked up to the second person. His face was calm as usual. It was as if he didn't kill a person, but a chicken. Seeing Zhang Zhou walk up to him with his saber still dripping with blood, the second Baiming cavalryman's expression changed again and again. With the previous example, his heart was in a mess. Speak? That would be betrayal. If he didn't speak, he would die. It was very likely that he wouldn't die quickly. What choice should he make? Zhang Zhou didn't give the cavalrymen much time to think. To Zhang Zhou, there were a total of 97 captives. Even if half of them died, it didn't matter. In the end, as long as one of them spoke, it would be fine. He believed that among these 97 captives, there would always be someone who was afraid of death. It's your turn. Same question. What do you want to say? Zhang Zhou's voice was very normal. It was as simple and casual as a commoner asking if they had eaten. I. Just as the cavalryman was hesitating, the ghost-head saber fell again, and another arm flew into the air. Before it landed, Zhang Zhou's hellish voice sounded. You're actually a stutterer. How boring. No. I'm not a stutterer. The cavalryman who lost an arm shouted loudly, but it was the last sound he made in his life. The ghost-head saber fell again, and another head was separated from the body. After killing 2 people, Zhang Zhou didn't have any intention of stopping. Compared to these people who attacked the 5-star army and killed innocent civilians, what he did wasn't excessive at all. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the third person. With the example of the first 2 captives, this person was so scared that he lost control of his bladder. When he saw that the person who came was a devil who killed without batting an eyelid, he was completely terrified. Without asking, he took the initiative to say, We are the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry. Pooh! The ghost-head saber fell again, and an arm flew into the air. Hiss! This scene frightened the other 94 captives. What? Did he still have to die after answering the question? Just as everyone looked at Zhang Zhou, wondering what was going on, an awkward expression appeared on Zhang Zhou's face. Sorry, my hand slipped. I'm used to it. You won't die anymore. Zhang Zhou said apologetically to the cavalryman of Baiming who lost an arm and was rolling on the ground in pain. Pain, unbearable pain, intense pain. Even so, the cavalryman of Baiming didn't dare to faint because he didn't know whether he would lose his value or die if he fainted. Well, you're not bad. Men, take him away and bandage him properly. I hope he doesn't die. Zhang Zhou ordered his team members. Then, he went to the 4th person. The question has changed. How many people did you bring this time? Where are they? With Zhang Zhou, the god of death, the captive soldiers were very cooperative. They all told Zhang Zhou everything they knew. Even the injured Dong Ping was very cooperative. He even revealed his identity, and said that he was the leader of the cavalrymen of Baiming. He even said that he was willing to lead the 5-star army to take care of the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry hidden in the mountains to atone for his crimes. According to Su Yinsheng's instructions, the results were quickly sent to the logistics headquarters via telegram. Yang Si took the results to the headquarters of the new army. The 102nd and 103rd divisions moved out, and went straight to the few forests that Dong Ping and the others had told them about. Surround this place. Prepare the kerosene and burn it. After tens of thousands of cavalrymen surrounded the forest, the commander of the 103rd Division, Qin Feng, ordered his men to start a fire attack. In the forest, 5,000 Liaodong heavy cavalry were hiding. The leader was the deputy general of the Baiming heavy cavalry, Luo Baikuan. Considering that there were too many people for a sneak attack, Luo Baikuan only brought 10,000 cavalrymen this time in order to hide himself better. Originally, everything was going smoothly. They could even eat the food they stole and be self-sufficient. Just when Luo Baikuan wanted to use the battle to support the 5-star army, the situation suddenly changed. The scouts reported that tens of thousands of 5-star army soldiers appeared outside the forest they were hiding in. He had a bad feeling in his heart, but in order to calm the soldiers down, Luo Baikun said indifferently, "It's fine. Even if they know we are here, they can't do anything to us in the forest." Luo Baikun was very confident. However, unexpectedly, the 5-star army didn't have any intention of charging into the forest. Instead, they used the most primitive and most direct method of attack, fire attack. On the grasslands there were many forests, valleys, and hills. Especially the forests, because the environment was well protected, there wasn't a problem of random logging. Dense forests could be seen everywhere. This was the main reason for the instability. However, even if they knew this was the case, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't burn the entire forest, right? If they did, what would they do when they needed firewood to build houses? However, if they had enough information, it wouldn't be a problem to burn only one place. Just like now, the fire was only aimed at the hiding place of the Ming cavalry. When the smoke rose, all sorts of birds and animals in the forest ran out. Not long after, the Ming cavalry also charged out. Luo Baikun couldn't allow his brothers to be suffocated or burned to death. Although he knew that there was a large group of 5-star army archers waiting for him outside, he had no other choice. Other than charging out, there was no other way. When they rushed out, Luo Baikun had also played a trick. He had divided the 5,000 people into 20 groups. The larger groups had 1,000 people, while the smaller groups only had a few hundred people. The purpose of this was to confuse the 5-star army outside. When the 5-star army was at their wits' end, more people would have a chance to escape. This included himself. In order not to attract attention, Luo Baikun only left 50 bodyguards behind after he finished distributing the other groups. With such a small group charging out, they naturally wouldn't be a big target and wouldn't attract the attention of the 5-star army. As expected, when Luo Baikun's team followed behind the other teams, they didn't attract the attention of the 103rd Division. They thought that it was just a small group of enemies. After a series of arrows, Luo Baikun finally managed to escape, leaving behind 20 or so bodyguards' corpses. Chapter 13-15. After interrogating the captives, he found out that the big fish was released. Commander Qin Feng blamed himself very much. This battle showed him that Ming's elite Liaodong cavalry was completely different from his previous opponents. In the past, he dealt with some bandits and some anti-Yangxia forces without a strict organization. Compared with Ming's highly disciplined Liaodong cavalry, he was too far behind. Qin Feng put away his carelessness and took the initiative to apologize to Commander Tiger's man. Afterwards, he was given a warning, which made him more alert and finally became a famous general. Luo Baikun was lucky and finally escaped, but the others were not so lucky. After the battle, only less than 1,000 cavalry returned to Toulouse city through various means. When they went out, there were 10,000, but when they came back, there were only 1,000. In comparison, the loss was far more than the 5-star army, and they were elites. In order to cultivate this elite cavalry, Ming spent a lot of manpower, material, and financial resources. Every loss would make Fang Dingshan's heart ache. This time, they lost so much that he really wanted to cry. After Wu Qiho heard the news, he first comforted Fang Dingshan, saying that these lost soldiers could be re-recruited and retrained, and that there was no need to be too sad. After that, he suggested that the Liaodong cavalry should be prepared for battle. After all, he did not know whether this would anger Bungnam of Gojoseon, and whether it would lead to a war between the 5-star army and the Ming army. Commander Tiger's man did not dare to make the decision whether to attack Toulouse city or not. He sent a telegram to Yang Chendong and reported the matter in detail. After Yang Chendong, who was in Ili County, learned of the situation, he gave the order for everything to proceed as usual. This time, although the Ming army provoked them first, they suffered the biggest loss. He believed that with this lesson, they would not act recklessly again. As for not falling out with Ming, Yang Chendong naturally had his own plans. Yang Chendong could attack other foreign races, forces, or countries without hesitation, and he would not hesitate to move forward with the blood and corpses of his enemies. But for the great Ming dynasty, which was full of Han people, he would never do that. His goal was the strength of the Han people, and to reach the peak with them. If he killed a Han person, wouldn't that be the opposite of his goal? The matter was temporarily put aside. After this matter came out, Shiheng and Fang Dingshan became a lot more honest. Although they did not know why the 5-star army did not retaliate, they did not dare to try. If they really attracted the 5-star army, they did not have much confidence that they could stop them. But now, they were already satisfied that both sides were not interfering with each other. Outside Gonglu City, battle cries shook the heavens, and countless people wielding swords and blades were attacking the city walls. The soldiers wearing the Ili Bianli uniform were constantly shooting arrows or holding swords and spears to defend the city. Not far away from the city, the 5-star army's cavalrymen were lined up in neat rows. The flag of the 5-star army was fluttering high in the air. The commander of the first army of the non-humankind, Bai Shuang, was riding on a warhorse, silently watching everything that was happening in front of him. Ever since they had crossed the heavenly mountains and entered the Little Yule city, the first army led by Bai Shuang had appeared invincible. The quick-witted White Shuang adopted the method of sending out a small team when encountering a small group of enemies, and sending out the entire army when encountering a large group of enemies. This allowed the soldiers under him to gain experience on the battlefield. Although there were some losses because of this, the effect was very good. The soldiers had all experienced the cruelty of the battlefield, and had all seen blood. There were no new recruits in the army, and they were all veterans. While training the soldiers, Bai Shuang did not forget to strengthen himself. This time, only his first army came to Ili Bianli, and in the end, there were only 30,000 of them. With just these people, they wanted to overturn Ili Bianli, who had hundreds of thousands of soldiers and was the host. He did not have such arrogance. How to strengthen himself? After thinking about it, Bai Shuang had his own idea, and reported this idea to Yang Chenong through the radio, and obtained his approval. After obtaining permission, Bai Shuang started to put it into action, and under his hard work, the villages outside the important towns and cities were surrounded one by one. Some of the rich people in the villages became ghosts under the blades of the first army. After killing those who obstructed them, they opened the granaries, and the local people were finally able to fill their stomachs. At this moment, when the 5-star army expressed their intention to recruit them, and said that as long as they followed them, once they took down the important towns, they would be able to obtain more food. More and more young people joined the 5-star army, and the army swelled up. Since ancient times, the people were the kindest, and the easiest to be satisfied. This was not only the case for the Han people, but for the other races as well. Their request was very simple, and that was to be able to eat their fill and not starve to death. However, this small request could not be satisfied. The gap between the rich and the poor existed everywhere, but the emperors only saw the prosperity of the capital and the big cities. As for the lives of the people in the corners, they did not know, and no one would tell them. However, it was undeniable that these people were a force that could not be ignored, and they were often the first to rebel. Under Yang Hodong's guidance, Bai Shuang, who understood this principle, chose to pull these people under his command. He borrowed their strength to complete the strategy of using the spear to attack the shield. From the looks of it, everything was going smoothly. Currently, Bai Shuang had 30,000 soldiers of the first army under him, and 80,000 people under him. However, these 80,000 people were not the limit. Every day, thousands of people were joining at a rate of increasing. The more people there were, the more rations they would need. Thus, Bai Shuang gave up on the idea of attacking the small villages and set his sights on the important cities. Gonglu City was the main road from the capital to Telahara, and it was heavily guarded. Of course, there was also a large amount of rations stored there. 110,000 people, under Bai Shuang's orders, surrounded Gonglu City, and what followed was a brutal siege. This battle would focus on the civilians. When Bai Shuang promised that once they took down the city, they would take 70% of the wealth and rations, while the 5-star army would only take 30%, the civilians became excited and agitated. Even without Bai Shuang's supervision, they had already made their own siege ladders. Holding the various weapons they had obtained before, including sabers, swords, spears, staffs, and even hoes and pickaxes, they launched an extremely fierce attack on Gonglu City. Within Gonglu City, there were 20,000 soldiers of the First Army. With such an advantage in numbers, if the First Army of the non-humankind only had 30,000 soldiers, it would be almost impossible to take them down with cold weapons. However, with these 80,000 soldiers, it was a completely different story. They were fighting for survival, and they were truly fearless. After one wave died, another wave charged up, and it seemed like they would not stop until they took down the city. After 5 days of continuous siege, only half of the 20,000 soldiers in the city remained alive. Moreover, the morale of the soldiers was very low. Seeing that the city was about to fall, the general had no choice but to send out the 6th carrier pigeon to ask for help. At this time, within the palace of the First Army, King Bao Lide was sitting on his throne with a worried expression. His gaze fell on Prime Minister Arab, General Waliji, Korban, and the others in the hall, as if he was asking for advice. The sudden appearance of the First Army had completely caught the First Army off guard. When King Bao Lide and Prime Minister Arab had analyzed the situation, they had not thought of this at all. They believed that while the 5-star army was powerful, their lack of manpower was a fatal flaw. It was impossible for them to pose any threat to the First Army. With Heavenly Mountain, even if the 5-star army came, they would not be able to send too many people. After all, once there were too many people, food would become a huge hindrance. They had come with the intention of watching from the sidelines, and they had even thought about how many reinforcements they should send to help the Turpan kingdom. After all, they knew that if the lips were gone, the teeth would be cold. Who would have thought that the 5-star army would appear right in front of them, and no one could stop them? They had arrived at Gonglu City just like that. Gonglu City was only a little over 200 li away from Ili City. Once that place was breached, Ili City would be in grave danger. It could be said that their foundation had been shaken. Under King Bao Lide's gaze, Arab finally spoke. "We have to save them, but the problem is how to save them, and how many soldiers to send out." This meant that Arab was also hesitant. How many people should they send to save them? Should they send their main force to fight the 5-star army? Or should they send out a small number of soldiers to save Gonglu City from being surrounded? The reason why Arab was so troubled was because the people attacking the city were the citizens of the First Army. Even if they killed them, it would not do any harm to the 5-star army. On the contrary, they would have to bear the bad reputation of killing the citizens. This was not what the Prime Minister wanted. On this point, Bao Lide was also in a difficult position, and he was also very angry. He believed that he had been very compassionate towards the people ever since he took the throne, and his cooperation with the Prime Minister Ali Pu was also considered tacit. The strength of the entire Ili Empire was constantly rising, otherwise, he wouldn't have the idea of expanding his territory. But why would the citizens rebel? This was simply incomprehensible. On this point, King Bao Lide had also committed a bureaucratic crime, and even Prime Minister Arab had become an accomplice to the villain. They could only see the prosperity in front of them, but they could not imagine the hardships of the people in the remote areas under their rule. Of course, with their status, it was difficult for them to investigate the hardships of the people. With a large number of people following them, how could they have the opportunity to do so? On this point, it had to be said that Yang Chendong had done very well. Chapter 13:16. With Yang Bao as a powerful tool, countless reporters went around and reported everything they saw and heard to the local Yang Bao. The situation could be seen at a glance. Once the reporters found out that there was a bug in their reports, they would receive a large reward. This greatly motivated the reporters. For example, the Yang Bao of the various regions had become something that important officials like City Lord Yu Qian had to read every day. Even Yang Chendong would read the different Yang Bao when he was free, to understand the situation under his rule. In an era without the internet, it was naturally impossible to spread the news all over the world. However, with Yang Bao, the situation was greatly alleviated. In particular, Yang Chenong strongly encouraged the reporters to report more shady things and gave them a large reward. This kind of thing that was usually seen as shameful by the monarch and even covered up was actually encouraged by Yang Chenong. It was easy to imagine that in front of these reporters, they would pick on some things for no reason. Which official would dare to mess around with their superiors? Yang Bao's appearance also became a spur to the officials of the various regions. Once they understood where the problem was, they would solve it as quickly as possible. They were afraid that this matter would be reported and affect their own political achievements. In addition, Yang Xie's law was based on a proportional distribution of grain. If the harvest was good, more grain would be handed in. If the harvest was bad, less grain would be handed in. And if the harvest was bad, children could still receive grain. In this way, they did not have to worry about not having enough to eat in a year of famine or having to hand in a large amount of grain when the harvest was good, and the people became richer. At the very least, food and clothing were no longer a problem. The commoners would be able to eat their fill, and they would have extra money to buy the things they liked. Under such living conditions, who would think of rebelling? If someone dared to think of rebelling, they would not be able to get past the people. Different policies led to different people's hearts. Compared to Yang Xie, there were too many loopholes. No matter how hard Bao lied and Alip worked, no matter how good their policies were, when it came to the implementation of the policies, it was completely different. The people still did not have real benefits. Without food to eat, what could they do if they did not rebel? But no matter what, they were still citizens under their rule. If they really fell out with them, they would only lose their own strength. This was what gave Bao Lide and Alip a headache. The people were their roots, but now they had become their enemy. At this moment, the two of them regretted it. If they had known this would happen, they would have been nicer to the commoners, or at least moved them into the city. This was all their fault for underestimating the power of the common people. They thought that these people were just a pile of loose sand and wouldn't be able to do much. We have to save them, and we have to kill the civilians as well. After hesitating for a long time, King Baolide finally made up his mind. Hearing this decision, Prime Minister Alipa's body trembled. He knew that the worst result was coming. It was hard to imagine what would happen if all the civilians were killed. Even if they won the war, there would be no civilians in the future. How could they talk about the country's development? But at this moment, he really couldn't stop it because he knew that based on the current situation, this decision was undoubtedly the correct one. Now that he had made up his mind, things were much easier. Next, he ordered Wu Liji to lead the 80,000 cavalrymen out of the city to rescue Gonglu County. If the commoners didn't retreat, they were to kill them. Wu Liji obeyed the order and left. It was only a distance of 200 li, and for the cavalrymen, it would only take them half a day. As soon as their vanguard army left the inner city, the scouts of the first army of the non-human kind discovered them and quickly sent the news back. Military commander? 80,000 cavalrymen, I'm afraid we won't be able to defeat them. In the temporary military tent, the 301st Regiment's commander, Tu Hai, said with a face full of worry. During this period of time, Bai Shuang had used his own methods to convince Tu Hai and the others, allowing them to fully realize that other than being a little younger, this commander in front of them was indeed outstanding in terms of personal ability. If they had to compare, he was much stronger than Commander Sukuda. Not only Tu Hai, but the other 3 division commanders also looked at Bai Shuang. They wanted to see how this military commander would deal with this situation. That's right, we won't be able to defeat them, Bai Shuang said with a relaxed face, not blushing in the slightest. He only had 30,000 men, while the enemy had 80,000 cavalrymen. Furthermore, they were fighting on their home ground. Whether it was the logistics or the replenishment of their troops, they were not something he could compare to. Since that was the case, there was no way he could continue fighting this battle. If we can't win, then we'll retreat. Our original plan wasn't to attack the big cities anyway. Retreat? Hearing this decision, Tu Hai and the others were stunned. Obviously, this result was out of their expectations. Of course we have to retreat. Didn't Division Commander 2 already say that? If we can't win, then what are we waiting for? Order the army to prepare to retreat. Oh right, take out a portion of the silver we've obtained during this period of time and distribute it to the commoners. Tell them that this is a reward for their hard work over the past few days. Bai Shuang chuckled. Retreating was the right thing to do. By making preparations in advance, they could ensure that they would not suffer any losses when the Ili army arrived. But when it came to giving out silver, the division commanders were confused. If they were going to retreat, then the commoners would naturally be abandoned as well. What was the point of giving them silver then? Seeing that the 4 division commanders were silent, it was clear that they could not understand. Bai Shuang knew that if he didn't explain, then everyone would not be able to get over it. Thus, he said, "Silver is just a worldly possession. We are now marching to war. Bringing so many things will only affect our speed. Since that's the case, why don't we give half of it to the commoners? This way, they will know how good we are. So, when Ili suppresses Li Dejun, what do you think they will think at that time?" Oh, I understand. This is a comparison. As the invaders, we give the commoners silver. On the other hand, their army is going to slaughter the commoners. This will only cause the commoners to be even more alienated from them. It is possible that they will come looking for us. Luan Xiaojing, the commander of the 302nd Division, said with a look of sudden realization. Yes, this is a trap. Sensei Naganabu, the commander of the 303rd Division, also spoke up. It was rare for someone of a different race to have such a thorough understanding of Han culture. Bai Shuang was very satisfied with his subordinate's performance. Then, he said with a smile, "All right, since everyone knows the meaning behind this, let's go make the arrangements now." The first army of the foreign races took out half of the silver they had plundered and distributed it to the commoners who were attacking the city. This received a wave of praise. In comparison, their own king had abandoned them, while the enemy had sent them silver. It was clear who was better and who was worse. Amidst the praises of the commoners, Wu Liji led the 80,000 cavalry to the outskirts of Gonglu City. What followed was a massacre of the commoners. Infantry was naturally weaker than cavalry. In addition, their weapons were not as good as the enemy's, and there was no effective organization. Very quickly, the commoners were forced to retreat. Blood flowed like a river outside the city, and more than 20,000 commoner corpses were left behind. General Wu Liji was not happy at all after winning such a battle. He didn't even know if this was a good or bad thing. However, as a general, he was just following orders. With a sigh, he ordered, "Fortify the city. Prepare arrows, kerosene, logs, and boulders in case the enemy attacks again." Just as Wu Liji was reorganizing the defenses of Gonglu City, a piece of news spread through the entire inner country. It was said that Bao Lide was an army that didn't dare to fight against the 5-star army, and only dared to kill the commoners. Very soon, the commoners were in an uproar, and the foundation of the country was greatly shaken. At this time, the first army of the foreign races had already turned around and headed towards the west of Keet Mian Mountain. There was a city called Tudarak, and it was their next target. Since they were already prepared, the army retreated safely without suffering any losses. This made Bai Shuang, the new commander, even more powerful. Currently, there were very few people in the first army who didn't want to submit to this young commander. When the first army of the foreign races arrived at the vicinity of Tudarak City, it could be imagined that there would be another one-sided slaughter. Perhaps not long after, the commoners here would be instigated by them again, and the reputation of the 5-star army as a good army would spread very quickly here. In Luobu city of the Yarkiang tribe, the new 5 armies were preparing to continue their expedition. With the example of the first army, Shi Wanshan followed suit, and used the local commoners to bribe and make use of them. Moreover, they were doing very well. One of the most important reasons was that they had the help of the surrendered general, Aleifu. This was definitely a great weapon. As a general of the Yarkiang tribe, Aleifu was very familiar with the situation here. After Shi Wanshan and Ning Wenfeng had a discussion, they put Aleifu in an important position and allowed him to establish an army. With the support of the new 5 armies, a puppet army was quickly established, and its members were constantly expanding. This time, they were able to successfully take down Luobu city, and this puppet army played a very important role in it. After taking down the city, they opened the granary, and all the puppet army, including their families, were able to eat and save a lot of food. Suddenly receiving so many benefits out of nowhere, it was natural for a person's mentality to change easily. Compared to working hard for many years and still having to live a poor life, now that they could have enough to eat and wear, this also aroused the greed in the hearts of many people. The number of the puppet army increased, and in just a few days, it surpassed the number of the new 5 armies, reaching a huge number of 40,000. Chapter 13-17. Araf regained control of the military power. These were all given to him by the 5-star army. This made him very excited, and at the same time, he felt even more loyal. With his full cooperation and the people wanting to get better benefits, the new 5-star army led them all the way south and went straight to the next target, Chitai City. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the entire Yirkiang tribe to fall into chaos under the suppression of the 2 armies. Perhaps at that time, the 5-star army's main force would be able to solve all the problems here. Compared to the results and victories of the 1st army and the new 5-star army, Yang Qindong's main force of the 5-star army had just taken down the Iron Gate Pass and was confronting the Aries dynasty from afar. This time, the Aries dynasty was entrusted by the 3 countries to help. They sent a total of 150,000 soldiers, including 100,000 cavalry and 50,000 infantry. When Yang Qindong heard the news, he was speechless. Although the great Ming Empire was known for its vast land and abundant resources with a large population, its financial resources were not as strong as outsiders thought. At least in the area of warhorses, it was seriously lacking. Just like the 100,000 Liaodong iron cavalry, it was also built by Bai Ming at a great cost. If the great Ming Empire had an inexhaustible supply of warhorses, in addition to their powerful logistical support, wouldn't they be able to easily build an army of 1,000,000 soldiers? If that was the case, not to mention people looking for trouble with them, it would already be extremely fortunate if those foreign races didn't come looking for trouble. Just from this point alone, it could be seen how important warhorses were to a country. This time, the Aries dynasty sent 100,000 cavalry. It was said that some of the elite divisions had 2 horses per person. This number made Yang Qindong instantly jealous. Today, Yang Xia was very powerful. Whether it was territory, population, or wealth, it could definitely make any forces and countries look up to it. But in the area of warhorses, it was still seriously lacking. This naturally had a lot to do with the continuous increase in the number of soldiers of the 5-star army. But didn't it mean that the foundation of the 5-star army was still too weak? Now that there were more than 100,000 warhorses in front of him, it would be strange if Yang Qindong wasn't tempted. Just as he was thinking about how to deal with the Aries dynasty's army, he received a telegram from Tiger's Mane. It recorded in detail that Bai Ming's Liaodong iron cavalry had harassed the transport convoy and the immigrants. A group of villains. Beta Persei looked annoyed after reading the telegram. Yang Qindong's expression as he fell into deep thought. He had his own ideas on how to solve the problem between himself and the North and South Great Ming. Considering his goals and ideals, he first rejected the idea of heavy losses empire and Bai Ming himself. In the future, the Han people would become the rulers of the entire world. If their population was too small, it would not work. If the population was too small, he couldn't do something that would harm his own strength. At this moment, the Han people of Bai Ming Empire had long been regarded by Yang Qindong as his own people. Even if he lost a person for no reason, he would feel heartache. It was a pity that very few people would be able to understand his way of thinking. Perhaps in the eyes of many people in the great Ming dynasty, especially those from the imperial family and the so-called well-read people who wanted to gain benefits, he was an anomaly. He was someone who wanted to usurp the throne. How difficult would it be to make these people surrender to him without shedding a drop of blood on their swords? The revolution had not succeeded yet. Comrade, you still need to work hard. For his great ideals, Yang Chenong would not retreat even if he knew that there was a bottomless abyss in front of him. He firmly believed that as long as he did something, there was a possibility of success. And he was now on the path to success. Since you took the initiative to provoke us, you must pay the price. Send a telegram to Tiger's Mane and tell him to act like an army attacking the city and force Shiheng to hand over the people. Tell them to hand over 1 million Han people. Otherwise, we will break through Tulu's city and kill our way to Ming's capital. Send a telegram to Yang Si and have his logistics division fully cooperate. Yang Chenong said firmly. 1 million? Hearing this request, Beta Persei took a deep breath and said worriedly, I'm afraid they won't agree to this request, right? They definitely will. Yang Chenong's lips curled into a smile. No one understood the system of the great Ming dynasty better than him. At this moment, the northern Ming dynasty was in a weakened state and was no match for the 5-star army. He could see this logic clearly, and Zhu Qiyu could also see it clearly. In order to protect his position, he could only agree. In a country where military power was dominated by literature, the emperor was number 1, the important officials and clans were number 2, the other civil officials and scholars were number 3, and the generals were number 4. As for the commoners at the bottom of the hierarchy, they didn't even have a place. However, paying such a price could indeed temporarily protect his safety. Yang Chenong believed that Zhu Qiyu knew how to choose. And even if he didn't want to choose, others would help him make the choice. Yang Chenong's face was full of confidence. He wanted to use this method to nibble away at Ming's strength. It was like boiling a frog in warm water. One day, when the other party reacted, they would realize that they had no commoners to use, no army to send, and no people to recruit. At that time, it would be time to seize the fruits of victory without shedding a drop of blood. There was another important factor that prompted Yang Chenong to make this decision. As Qiqian's city continued to grow, as Yangtze's territory continued to expand, as the 5-star army's military strength increased, the Han people that he could use were insufficient. Just like in some of the secret factories in Qiqian city, as electricity was popularized and used, production lines were built one after another with the help of the technological books he took out. New factories also sprouted up like bamboo shoots after a rain, and all of them began to lack manpower. This forced Yang Chenong to think of other ways. In his opinion, it wasn't a big deal for some knowledge to be learned by the Han people. Even if he grew old one day and his descendants didn't live up to expectations, the ones who grasped this knowledge and power would definitely be the Han people. This way, even if they split and merged, in the end, the meat would still be in the pot and would not be taken advantage of by other countries. With this thought in mind, he dared to use the Han people even if they were a little stupid. Using this opportunity to bring in 1 million people, it should be able to greatly alleviate the development of Qiqian city. With Yang Chenong's confident tone, Beta Persei naturally wouldn't doubt it. After agreeing, he went to the telegraph room. Yang Chenong's gaze once again landed on the sand table in front of him. After a while, his magnetic voice sounded out. Men, inform the 4th Regiment Commander Ling Daqiang to make a trip here. With a gold star on his shoulder, Ling Daqiang quickly appeared in front of Yang Chenong. As the Cold Vanguard Division, Yang Chenong favored him the most and invested the most in Firearms Division. At the beginning of the year, all of them were promoted from Senior Colonel to Major General. This also represented the promotion of their status and importance in the military. 6th Young Master, Ling Daqiang is here to report. Ling Daqiang gave a standard military salute and stood on the spot with his chest puffed out. Very good. Yang Chenong, who was born in the military, looked at Ling Daqiang with satisfaction, then waved his hand and the two of them came to the sand table. Yang Chenong pointed at the Chang'o slope in front of the Iron Gate and said, See here, a total of 150,000 Aries dynasty troops, 100,000 cavalry and 50,000 infantry. How about it? Do you have the confidence to give them a good fight? Division Commander Ling Daqiang only had a little more than 8,000 people. It was impossible for Ling Daqiang to not be afraid of dealing with an army of 150,000 people. But since it was Yang Chendong's request, Ling Daqiang didn't hesitate and said, "Sixth young master, please give the order. I promise to complete the mission." Very good. What Yang Chendong wanted was this undiscounted attitude. Of course, he also knew that it was impossible to make all the enemies stay, so he just said to give the enemy a good fight. As for how to do it, he already had a plan in mind. Division Commander Ling, let the troops prepare. In 2 days, the individual rocket launchers and 20,000 grenades will be sent by the logistics department. After that, the armed forces will be ready to launch an attack in 3 days. Any questions? This was where Yang Chendong's confidence came from. After years of hard work, the rocket launcher lathe was finally successfully developed and started operating before the end of the year. Although it was far from being comparable to the ones in the future, one lathe could already produce 200 shells a day. With a total of 2 lathes, it was equivalent to producing 400 shells a day. This time, they had transported 5,000 shells at once, which was enough to deal with the current situation. As for the wooden grenades, they didn't require much technology. As long as the ratio of gunpowder was right, it was easy to install. This time, 20,000 pills were shipped over as well. They would continue to appear in an endless stream to ensure that the 5-star army would be able to provide powerful firepower support. This was the experience that Yang Chendong summarized from the Battle of Bo Tiangang. Facing a small group of cavalry, the use of firearms was very limited. It wasn't impossible to use them, but it was too wasteful and not worth it. But facing the enemy's army, there wasn't much of a problem. Yang Chendong had already decided that in the future, whenever he encountered a large number of enemies, he would use firearms. This way, not only would he be able to seize territory faster, he would also be able to reduce his casualties. Compared to the cost of weapon materials, he would be able to save a lot of money on compensation for the soldiers. So why not? Originally, Ling Daqiang didn't have much confidence, but the order was given by Yang Chendong, so even if he couldn't do it, he still had to do it. Now that he heard that there were rocket launchers and grenades as support, he was naturally full of confidence. When he faced Yang Chendong again, his voice was a bit louder as he replied, "I promise to complete the mission." Chapter 13-18. Under Yang Chendong's orders, the 4th Division was ready for battle. The other armies, divisions, and regiments also received different missions. They were just waiting for the cannon to sound and the enemy to fall into chaos. In comparison, the 150,000-strong Aries Dynasty army was still dreaming. Due to its geographical location, the Aries Dynasty's people were valiant, especially their cavalry. After all, the influence of the grassland cavalry was still there, and it was not at its weakest yet. While their military was strong, their economic strength was too weak. As nomads other than herding, they robbed. As for production and construction, they were still in the embryonic stage. Strictly speaking, they had just gained consciousness and had not done anything yet. It was because of this that they needed to rob to get what they needed. Just like food, they had been relying on robbing to survive. Now, they could finally change their method, which was to demand. Since they had sent troops to help Ili Bali and Yerkiang, previously, they had also included the Turpan kingdom. The benefits were a must. Just like how the 3 countries had promised that as long as the Aries dynasty sent troops, their food would not be a problem and they would take care of it. When the Aries dynasty saw that this was a good opportunity to increase their income and wanted to get a share of the pie, Turpan had already been wiped out. Ili Banli and Yerkian had also split up their troops because of the 5-star kingdom, causing them to be unable to take care of themselves. Instead, the Aries dynasty had become a scattered army that no one cared about. This result was naturally not satisfactory, especially the leading general, Daedar. Before he left, he had promised King Yuzong Hasan that he would bring back more food and other spoils of war. However, now that he had become an existence that no one cared about, he had been suppressing his anger for a long time. In the tent, Dedar angrily said to his two deputies, Nizam and Nurahan, "Send more scouts to inform the other two countries. Tell them that if they do not send more food, we will retreat. At that time, we will let the 5-star army occupy this region and they will have nothing." "Yes." The two generals immediately lowered their heads and answered. When he raised his head, Ridhar's expression was much better. "How is it? What's the reaction of the 5-star army?" "Yes, they have been mobilizing their troops for the past 2 days. However, due to the large number of enemy scouts, our scouts were unable to follow them too closely. We do not know where they are going, but I think they should be prepared." Nurhan reported everything he knew in detail. From his attitude, one could see that he was very professional and very careful. After talking for a while, he saw that Dirtle was only listening with his eyes squinted. Dirtle didn't express his opinion. After thinking for a while, he carefully said, "General, according to my opinion, the 5-star army will make a big move this time. Should we retreat a bit and maintain enough distance between the two sides?" "Retreat? Retreat to where?" This time, before Ridhar could speak, Nizam spoke first. "The distance between the two sides is now 20 li. This is enough to act as a buffer between the two armies. Even if the enemy wants to make a move, we have enough time to make arrangements. Furthermore, I don't think the 5-star army will take the initiative to attack us. This kind of mutual destruction is not something they want to see." Speaking of this, Nizam had a smug look on his face. He had seriously analyzed the strength of both sides. Although the 5-star army was strong, they only had about 200,000 soldiers. Even if they added in the miscellaneous troops, they would still have less than 300,000 soldiers. Adding in the Ili tribe and Yirkiang tribe, they had a total of 500 to 600,000 soldiers. This was twice the number of the enemy. Furthermore, they had the home ground advantage. He couldn't think of any possibility of losing. Just the 150,000 soldiers on his side was already a tough bone. The enemy's 5-star army was even weaker than his side. What would they use to attack? Was this a joke? Nizam was very confident, and this affected Ridhar as well. Ridhar was also very optimistic as he said, "That's right, this general thinks so too. The 5-star army doesn't have the appetite to eat us. They are just bluffing. There's no need to pay attention to them. Just let them do what they want." Seeing that the two generals didn't care, Nurahan was a little worried and wanted to say something. But the 100,000 Kazakh soldiers were wiped out by the 5-star army. "We can't just let them, enough." Seeing that Nurahan was still talking, Ridhar's face darkened. "That's because they underestimated us. Botian Mound's terrain isn't suitable for an army to spread out. Our Changdo slope is completely different. Our terrain here is wide and there are many high slopes around us. As long as we form a triangle formation, they won't be able to take advantage of us." In this battle, Deridar's confidence was largely due to the terrain they were in. Changdo's slope was 30 li long and a few dozen li wide. There were many high slopes around it, and they were all occupied by their army. It could be said that as long as the 5-star army dared to attack here, they would be able to take the lead. If the cavalry on the ground cooperated with them, they might not be able to return alive, but they would definitely be able to heavily injure them. "Yes." Nuerahan still wanted to say something, but after being reprimanded by Ridhar, he shut his mouth. Although he felt that there was no problem with his arrangements, he didn't know why, but he was very anxious. He felt like something bad was going to happen. "All right, all of you are dismissed. Take care of your own army. What we need to do now is to stay put and not move. We can stop the 5-star army's main force from acting rashly. This will be a great merit. Whether it is Ili or Yirchiang, they will have to obediently send us rations and satisfy our demands," Ridhar said with a cold smile. He had a plan in his mind. Unless there was no other choice, he wouldn't make an enemy out of the 5-star army. He would just wait here and continue to collect rations from the two countries. He would then send them back to his own country to solve the problem of food for the Aries dynasty. Without spending a single soldier, he would be able to reap so many benefits. No matter how he looked at it, it was a great merit. As for whether the 5-star army would really attack, he wasn't afraid. With 150,000 soldiers, if the 5-star army really wanted to attack, he wouldn't mind showing them his power. He would let them know that the 5-star army wasn't invincible in this place. 2 days had passed. Hundreds of carriages and mules appeared in the main camp under the protection of the 2nd Legion. In order to ensure the safety of these cannons and grenades, the 2nd Legion's commander Niu Duo personally escorted them, along with the 305th and 306th regiments. With such a formation, even if they met with a surprise attack, they would still have the ability to retaliate. After the goods were handed over, the cannons and grenades as well as 50 individual rocket launchers were sent to the 4th Regiment's commander. Niu Duo then went to the main camp and reported to Yang Chidong. The report was true, but so was the attack mission. As soon as Niu Duo entered the camp, he sensed the aura of a great battle. Bai Shuangjing, who was also a commander of the alien army, led the first army of the alien race to cause a ruckus, as if Sun Wukong had entered Princess Iron Fan's stomach. Niu Duo's 2nd army could only be responsible for the protection of logistics. The huge difference made him feel very unfair. Bai Shuang was Yang Chendong's student. This was something that Niu Duo could not compare to. Therefore, he usually endured it and did not say anything. But this time, since he had caught up, he would not sit at the side and be a spectator no matter what. He also wanted to attack. He wanted to obtain military merits for the 2nd Legion. In the main tent, Niu Duo, who still had the rank of senior colonel, walked in after asking for instructions. Yang Chendong was sitting on a chair, drinking tea and reading the new issue of the Yang Report in the first city. He looked very leisurely. This made Niu Duo happy. Yang Chendong was in a good mood. This was a good sign. He quickly took 2 steps forward and came in front of Yang Chendong. He gave a standard military salute and said, "Reporting to the 6th young master, Niu Duo of the 2nd Legion is here to report on his work. Please give your instructions." As soon as Niu Duo entered the tent, Yang Chendong saw him. He did not greet him because he thought that there was no need. This commander was personally appointed by him, which was enough to prove that he thought highly of this person. Since he was one of his own people, why was there a need to be polite? Seeing that Niu Duo was standing there so upright, Yang Chendong put down the newspaper in his hand and said with a smile, "Commander Niu, come and sit." "Thank you, 6th young master, for giving me a seat." Niu Duo replied mechanically. Then, he carefully went to the stool beside Yang Chendong and sat down. Even if he sat down, it might not be as comfortable as standing. He could only lean his butt against the stool and look like he would stand up at any time. It looked a little tiring. After noticing Niu Duo's uncomfortable sitting posture, the corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a smile. "All right, there are no outsiders here. Make yourself at home." As he spoke, he pushed the fruit plate in front of him forward. On the fruit plate, there were paper-wrapped candies, peanuts, melon seeds, and cigarettes. It was quite sumptuous. Niu Duo opened his mouth and revealed a somewhat unnatural smile. Then, he carefully took the Bugnam of Gojoseon brand cigarettes and handed one to Yang Chendong. He also took one for himself. Yang Chendong conveniently took the cigarette. Niu Duo had already lit the match and had a look of regret on his face. All of these were created by Yang Chendong. They were all amazing inventions. Anyone who saw them would be shocked. Chapter 13-19. With the help of Niu Duo's lit match, Yang Chendong lit his cigarette and took a light puff. He said casually, "How was it? Did the journey go smoothly?" Reporting to the 6th young master, it went very smoothly. Knowing the importance of this batch of supplies, our outsiders' 2nd Army sent 2 divisions to escort them. No one was blind enough to have any ideas about them. When it came to serious matters, Niu Duo straightened his body again. Good, be at ease, be at ease. Yang Chendong nodded. Did you know that Bai Ming attacked the logistics team? Yes, I heard. They are really bold. Sixth young master, this subordinate requests for battle. Please allow our outsider's second army to attack Tulu City and teach the Bai Ming army a lesson. Niu Duo's face was full of anger when he spoke about this matter. He only hated the fact that the other party didn't attack him. Otherwise, he would definitely teach them a lesson. Not for the time being. Yang Chendong's expression was also somewhat angry. I have already sent a telegram to Tiger's Mane and told him to negotiate with Bai Ming. If they don't compensate, then beat them up. Yes, if they don't listen, then beat them until they listen. Niu Duo also said in agreement. He was also born in the Great Ming Dynasty, and was previously a centurion in the Great Ming Dynasty's army. However, when it came to Bai Ming, he didn't hesitate at all. From this, it could be seen that he was now completely integrated into the five-star army. In the five-star army, the respect given to generals and soldiers was definitely not something the Great Ming Dynasty could compare to. In the Great Ming Dynasty, where the emperor and the scholar officials ruled the world together, using literature to suppress military force was the mainstream. Martial artists were also seen as brute men who only knew how to be brave and had no social status at all. Unlike in Yanxie, whether it was a general or a soldier, everyone was respected. As long as you had the ability, you would be given a platform to display your skills. There would not be any unfair treatment. This was also the reason why Yanxie was able to attract so many talents to come here. Niu Duo's face turned red at the thought of a platform for his performance. He stammered, Sixth young master, is there going to be a big battle? Logically speaking, this question was a bit abrupt. This was already a military secret. If Yang Chendong was not willing to talk about it, no one could pry into it. However, Niu Duo was the commander of an army after all. He was also someone that Yang Chendong trusted and thought highly of. Moreover, this was a private occasion, so it was not a nuisance to ask. Yes, we are going to attack the Aries dynasty's army. Yang Chendong did not intend to hide it. After all, the military action plan had been made long ago. Some cavalry troops had already begun to move to the planned position yesterday. There was no harm in telling Niu Duo now. Sure enough, they were going to attack. Niu Duo immediately became excited. He reached out to put out the cigarette and asked eagerly, Sixth young master, do we have any mission for the second army of the foreign race? You. Yang Chendong only knew Niu Duo's intention at this time. He could not help but laugh out loud. When Yang Chendong laughed, Niu Duo became a little nervous. He was afraid that his request would be rejected, so he hurriedly said, Sixth young master, our second army has 2 main divisions this time. We can also share the attack mission. Besides, Commander Bai and the others have been performing meritorious deeds. Commander Bai referred to Bai Shuang, the commander of the first army of the foreign race. Niu Duo mentioned him and asked Yang Chendong to give them a chance. They couldn't always watch others eat meat while they couldn't even drink soup. Originally, Yang Chendong did not have the intention to attack the second army of the foreign race. It was also because they were not present when the plan was made. But now that the weapons had arrived, and there were 2 main divisions with more than 10,000 people, it would be a waste if he did not use them. Besides, Bai Shuang had been performing meritorious deeds. It was not good to let Niu Duo and the others watch from the side. It was not good for the morale of the army. Considering these reasons, Yang Chendong finally nodded and said, Okay, follow me to the sand table to take a look. This meant that he agreed. Niu Duo was overjoyed. He hurriedly got up and followed Yang Chendong to the sand table. The weather in June on the grassland had a thin layer of mist in the morning, indicating that the weather would be good today. The 5-star army had breakfast at 5 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., the various armies began to move. Under the protection of the Liaodong Cavalry Division, Light Cavalry Regiment, and Reconnaissance Regiment, the 4th Infantry Division moved out and rushed towards the Aries dynasty's camp 20 miles ahead. This movement was noticed by the scouts and immediately reported back to the army. This shocked Lidar, who had just woken up and was still thinking about where to go for a stroll. Nizam and Nourahan, who received the news, rushed to the main tent. At this moment, Lidar was already sitting on a large chair. His calm face did not reveal what he was thinking. "General, the 5-star army has moved. They are rushing towards us," Nourahan reported softly. "I know. What are you panicking for? This is just the 5-star army's probing. I have already notified the entire army to be on alert." In this short period of time, Lidar had calmed down a lot. Although the 5-star army's actions were indeed a little out of his expectations, he didn't panic at all when he thought about how he had made sufficient preparations beforehand. After comforting himself, he sent his General Nourahan to the front line and another General Nourahan to contact the armies on the nearby mountains to get them to prepare for battle. Nourahan received the order and went to the front line. A total of 10,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry came out in battle armor. The Aries dynasty's army was not wealthy. The so-called armor was nothing more than a black-gray leather waistcoat, which did not provide much protection. However, the 20,000 people were still in formation, giving off a feeling of elite soldiers. Nourahan climbed up a wooden tower that was 10 meters tall and personally stood on the platform. He held a red and yellow flag in his hands. This was the command flag. It could be used as a clairvoyant to command the armies on the nearby mountains to cooperate with the army. Everything was ready and waiting for the enemy to appear. From his position, he could see everything that was happening on the battlefield. It was also because of this that he saw a scene that would shock him for the rest of his life, and he would never forget it. At 8 a.m., the 5-star army appeared 3 miles away from the Aries dynasty's army in a cloud of dust as if they were looking for a giant. One of the neat army made up of army green was moving forward step by step. "Prepare for battle." Nourahan saw that the 5-star army was about to enter the cavalry's attack range. He raised his sword and shouted loudly. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the 5-star army cavalry came to a halt one after another. It was like a high-speed car suddenly stopped on the highway. It was so neat. Just this action alone made Nourahan's heart sink unconsciously. It was said that military orders were like mountains. Often a small action could be used to see the discipline and fighting strength of an army. And from the cavalry that suddenly stopped, Nourahan had to admit that at least in the area of executing orders, the 5-star army's execution ability had surpassed the Aries army. After receiving the order, the Aries army would also act according to the order, but they would definitely not be as swift and unified as the 5-star army. It felt as if there was a bottomless abyss in front of them, and the army was standing on the edge of the cliff. While Nourahan was sighing, the army green mixed in with the 5-star army was still moving forward. It was like a giant beast sticking out its tongue and continuously moving forward. The military uniforms of the 5-star armies were not completely uniform, especially for the cavalry. Considering that they often had to face the enemy's arrow attacks when charging, it was very difficult to protect them just by wearing the green military uniform. Yang Chendong allowed the cavalry to not wear the green uniforms and could wear armor to protect themselves. But there was a clear requirement that the armor had to be mainly black in color. This way, it would have the effect of shocking and intimidating the enemy. Therefore, as infantry, the Ling 4th Division was especially eye-catching with their green uniforms mixed in with their black armor. When the soldiers of the Ling vanguard moved forward in an orderly manner and silently moved forward, it would often give people the feeling of a sharp sword being unsheathed and slashing forward. "These are infantry?" General Nizam was riding on a tall horse. He looked at the army of soldiers approaching slowly with a puzzled look on his face. If the 5-star army really wanted to attack, shouldn't they send out cavalry? Only cavalry could borrow the momentum of the horse to launch a charge and achieve the greatest effect of breaking the enemy. This was the advantage of cavalry. The man borrowed the momentum of the horse, and the blade borrowed the momentum of the wind. Only in this way could they be invincible. But what was the meaning of sending out infantry? Was it really just a probing move? Nizam's heart was filled with doubts. This was the first time he saw such a tactic, and he couldn't understand it. He raised his head to look at the high platform and wanted to see what Nourahan would say. At this moment, Nurhan also had a confused expression. How could this not be the first time he saw such a tactic? Usually, when two armies fought, no matter which side had cavalry, they would immediately launch an attack to ensure that the cavalry had the greatest advantage. Only those who were weak and didn't have cavalry would be forced to send out infantry to fight the cavalry. Usually, doing so would require them to pay a huge price. This was the most simple logic. It was like 1 + 1 = 2. Nurhan didn't believe that the 5-star army didn't understand this. If this was the case, they wouldn't have destroyed the Turpan kingdom. They wouldn't be invincible here. The more he understood this logic, the more confused he was about the 5-star army's cavalry stopping and the infantry advancing. Nurhan decided to wait. Firstly, he wanted to see what tricks the 5-star army was going to play. Secondly, he wanted to wait until they were at the most suitable distance to inform the cavalry to attack. Then, they would charge into the infantry and obtain victory first. Chapter 13:20. Nizam decided to wait and see, as Nurhan did not give any orders. He did not necessarily have to listen to this person, but since he had no ideas, he hoped to learn from the other person's opinion. As expected, the Ares army did not make any moves. Ling Duqiang, the commander of the 4th Division, had a flash of joy in his eyes. At this moment, he remembered what Yang Chendong said to him last night. The army should move forward boldly. This is our first battle with the Ares army. They will not act rashly before they understand our intentions. At that time, Ling Duqiang, who believed these words without a doubt, made a promise on the spot. The cold warriors were not afraid of any enemy and could complete the task of quickly suppressing the enemy. At that time, his attitude was firm, but when he really came to the battlefield, it was impossible to say that Ling Duqiang's heart did not beat like a drum. After all, this was a battlefield, especially one with tens of thousands of people. Only his army was constantly moving forward while the others were still looking at him. That kind of nervousness could not be described with words. De Chong was even prepared to deal with the enemy as soon as they launched an attack. But now, it seemed that Yang Chendong was far-sighted and predicted the enemy like a god. The enemy did not make any moves. This made his confidence soar, and his steps forward became even more firm. 2 li, 1½ li, 1 li. Finally, when they were 1 li away from the Ares army, Ling Duqiang's loud voice rang out. Halt, prepare for battle. 1 li was the limit of the cavalry's charge. If they were any closer, the cavalry would not be able to use their charging advantage. In other words, if they were to move forward, it would be equivalent to provoking the Ares army and forcing them to charge immediately. The same distance of 1 li was also the result of Yang Chendong's estimation. At this distance, as long as the 4th Division was prepared for battle, regardless of whether it was cavalry or infantry, they would be turned into ashes and die before they could even achieve victory. The Green Army was getting closer and closer. Nizam's right hand was already raised high, and he was ready to give the order to charge. But at this moment, the other party suddenly stopped moving. This made him unsure whether he should lower his right hand or retract it. Machine gunners, get ready, rocket launchers, ready to fire. Remember to hold the grenade for 3 breaths before throwing it. Sharpshooter, make sure the enemy doesn't get within 30 meters of us. Ling Duqiang's voice rang out one after another. All of the cold vanguard warriors took their positions, each carrying out their duties. Their eyes were fixed on the enemy 500 meters away from them. This wasn't the first time such an order had been given, and it was unknown how many times they had practiced this kind of training. But seriously speaking, this was the first time he had fought in such a way on the battlefield. It was finally time for a real battle. Even the well-trained soldiers of the cold vanguard were nervous. Their hands were sweating, and their foreheads were sweating. Some of them could even feel their arms trembling. After all, a drill was a drill. No matter how realistic it was, everyone would still think that it was fake from the bottom of their hearts. It was inevitable that they would let their guard down. However, actual combat was completely different. The slightest carelessness could lead to an irreversible situation. Every warrior did not wish to have any problems or mistakes. The more he was like this, the more nervous he was. The more nervous he was, the easier it was for him to make mistakes. The tension in the army quickly spread. As the commander, Ling Daqiang naturally felt it. He knew that he had to do something at this moment. "Men, bring me the gun!" A JS-12 7mm sniper rifle that had been polished until it was shiny was handed over to him. Ling Daqiang, who stood at the very front and was like a stabilizing force, sucked in a deep breath. Then, he raised his gun and aimed at the enemy flag bearer 500 meters away. He originally thought that the enemy would charge after he stopped moving. However, it seemed that the enemy was frightened, or perhaps they wanted to see him continue his performance. Ling Daqiang had no choice but to take the initiative. He wanted to fire the first shot. He wanted to use the sound of the gunshot to dispel the nervousness of the cold vanguard warriors. He wanted to use the gun to announce that the cold vanguard warriors would always be the strongest elite of the 5-star army. Following the 4th Master Lu's sudden stop, the earth seemed to have stopped moving. The 5-star army did not move. They were waiting for Ling Daqiang's shot to start the battle. The Ares army did not move. They wanted to continue watching what the 5-star army was going to do. At a distance of 1 li, they were confident that a cavalry charge would be able to wipe out the thousands of infantrymen of the 5-star army. The wind also seemed to have stopped at this moment. It seemed to have sensed something, or perhaps it was anticipating something. The only one who moved was Ling Daqiang. He raised his gun and controlled the speed of his heartbeat to gradually maintain a stable state. Then, he took a deep breath, exhaled, and breathed again. When his body had adjusted to the calm state, his right index finger slowly approached the trigger and moved it bit by bit. When he touched the trigger lightly and reached the state of being one with the world, the gunshot rang out. Bang! The bullet flew out of the barrel and pierced through the air. It was like an arrow leaving the bow as it shot towards the Ares army's flag bearer. The 12 7mm sniper rifle, known as the best sniper rifle in Asia in the future, could penetrate 15mm thick alloy steel plates at a distance of 1,000 meters. After a slight tremble, the flag bearer on the opposite side reacted accordingly. The warhorse trembled violently for a moment before its body swayed and fell with a plop. Good! With a single shot, the flag bearer's head exploded from 500 meters away. This shot caused the cold vanguard soldiers standing behind him to cheer loudly. Good gun! Ling Daqiang was also secretly happy. This 12 7mm sniper rifle was taken from Yang Chenong yesterday afternoon. The current Crimson City's arsenal was far from being able to produce such a sharp gun. Naturally, this was taken from the warehouse by Yang Chenong. He also took out 100 sniper bullets and gave them to Ling Daqiang. Yesterday afternoon, Ling Daqiang fired 50 shots and finally familiarized himself with the gun's functions. Now that it was used, he was amazed. Killing someone 500 meters away was as easy as taking something out of his pocket. Compared to the 95 style, which had a maximum killing range of 400 meters, it was naturally much better. What a pity, this gun will have to be returned after today's battle. Ling Daqiang thought it was a pity. Then, he focused on aiming at the next target. It was a Ares cavalry soldier who was wearing armor, and was obviously not a leader. After a loud explosion, the flag bearer died. This scene shocked all the soldiers of the Ares army. In their eyes, the strongest weapon in the world was a strong bow. A good bow with great strength could take a person's life from 150 meters away. This person was a godly archer. Even in the Ares dynasty, there were only a few people who could do this. But what did they just see? A distance of 500 meters had been directly killed by the other party. There was no hesitation at all. This scene was completely beyond everyone's understanding. This was something that was impossible and impossible to accomplish. Now, it was clearly displayed in front of everyone's eyes. If they did not see it with their own eyes, no one would dare to believe it was real. Bang! Another gunshot rang out, and another centurion was shot dead. However, this shot was slightly off. It hit the shoulder, but it still shattered the shoulder blade. The centurion fell from the horse and was about to die from excessive blood loss. Bang, bang, bang! De Chang gradually got used to the 12.7mm sniper rifle's performance, and also liked this method of killing. He kept pulling the trigger and one after another fell from the horse, becoming a ghost under the gun. In the short span of a dozen breaths, a flag bearer, 5 centurions, and a chiliarch had been killed on their horses. This also allowed Nizam, who was leading the team, to regain his senses. He immediately shouted, "Charge! Cavalry charge in front, infantry follow behind, kill all the enemies!" They had no choice but to charge. Who knew if they would be the next to die if this continued? Nizam's shout was an order. The cavalry of the Aries dynasty, who were still silent under the gunfire, quickly responded. One after another, the cavalry began to gallop and rush towards Nizam. Hew! De Chang finally put down the 12.7mm sniper rifle in his hand. De Chang's face was filled with excitement. He turned around and looked at 1st Regiment leader Gao Xiang, 2nd Regiment leader He Wen, and 3rd Regiment leader Lu Jing. Follow the plan. Yes. The 3 regimental leaders quickly saluted and ran to their respective command posts. A distance of 500 meters could be covered in less than a minute for the cavalry. This was the time when the 4th Regiment was preparing. Gunners, fire! After the 1st Regiment commander gave the order, concentrated gunshots started to ring out. It was as if a whirlwind had blown past and swept forward. Dozens of light machine guns and several heavy machine guns all opened fire. It was like hundreds of firecrackers were lit. The sound quickly rang out. In exchange, the charging cavalry fell one after another. The Aries dynasty cavalry were either shot or their horses were shot. However, no matter what method, the result would not change. One after another, the cavalry was killed on their horses. One after another, the cavalry fell on the charging path. Under the inertia, there were still more Aries dynasty cavalry attacking. At this time, it was no longer a question of whether they wanted to charge or not. They simply could not stop. Rocket launchers ready, fire! Grenades ready, throw! His thoughts were in a mess until the cavalry of the 5-star army launched an attack. Only then did he regain his senses. Then, he waved the red and yellow flag in his hand. He knew that it would take time for the army to retreat. He had to mobilize the army on each mountain and let them charge forward to slow down the enemy's attack. Whether it was a counterattack or a retreat, they had to buy enough time. Within the 5-star army's camp, the cavalry charged forward. With the new army's cavalry as the lead, the cavalry of the 2nd Army's 2 divisions formed the 2nd echelon and launched the cavalry charge. What happened just now was like a nightmare for the Aries army. But to the 5-star army, it was indeed a victory that roused their morale. This was especially so for the Ear army, who didn't know much about firearms. When they saw the might of the 5-star army's firearms, they were filled with pride and excitement. At this moment, the army's morale reached its peak. When the order to charge was given, some of the cavalry's speed even caught up with the new army's 1st echelon. They couldn't wait to show off their skills on the battlefield. Charge down the mountain and stop the charging speed of the 5-star army's cavalry. The military order was like a mountain. The Aries army on the nearby mountains charged forward. It felt like a fierce tiger coming down from the mountain towards the 5-star army's cavalry from several directions. Boom, 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 boom. The 4th Division commander Yi Xingfeng had been waiting for this moment. He had been prepared to fire from the back. He had already brought the cannoneers to adjust the gauges and waited for the enemy to make a move. Now, it was finally time for them to show their might. The 100mm mortar shells fell like meteors from outer space and landed in the midst of the Aries army that was charging from the foot of the mountain. Every time the cannons fired, a dozen or even more soldiers would die. Under the bombardment, the Aries army that was originally full of vigor was in a mess. Under the powerful bombardment, the Aries army was completely unprepared. They had never seen the power of such a cannon before and were stunned. They couldn't even differentiate north from south as they ran around under the bombardment. But the more they were like this, the greater the number of casualties. They didn't know that under the bombardment, lying down and not moving was the best choice. The old soldiers were afraid of guns and the new soldiers were afraid of cannons. But to the Ares army, they were all new soldiers. They didn't know how to deal with such an attack and how to avoid the greatest number of casualties. Under the bombardment, the so-called reinforcements became a joke. They couldn't even protect themselves and didn't even know where to run. The Ares army on the mountain was already in a mess. Using this opportunity, the 5-star army's cavalry charged to the back of the Ares army's vanguard. They used the speed of their horses and swung their swords. One by one, the Ares army fell to the ground as they wailed in pain. "It's over! It's all over!" Nourhan sat down on the high platform with a plop. From his position, he could see the entire situation. Because of this, he could see the Ares army's situation the clearest. He knew better than anyone else that the Ares army had lost. The army was already in a mess, there was no need to talk about morale. How could an army like this fight? How could they win a battle? Under the bombardment of guns, the situation on the battlefield was already one-sided. The Ares army's morale fell to the bottom. While they were terrified, they didn't have the courage to turn around and fight against the 5-star army. They only wanted to escape, the further the better. It would be best if they didn't let the 5-star army see them. In comparison, the 5-star army's morale was at its peak. They shouted loudly as they galloped on the battlefield on their horses. They chased and killed batch after batch of defeated Ares soldiers. They were having a great time. The vanguard was defeated. 10,000 cavalry and 10,000 infantrymen were killed, 1 surrendered, and 1 escaped. There were originally 30,000 Ares army soldiers on each mountain. However, under the bombardment of the cannons, they didn't even have the chance to use half of their combat power before they were defeated and escaped. The mountains were filled with deserters. Their weapons were also abandoned everywhere. It was a miserable scene. In the main tent of the Ares army, scouts rushed in one after another and reported the situation of the vanguard 8 miles away. When bad news came one after another, Ridhar's expression changed from the initial calm to anger. Then, his whole body started to tremble and his eyes lost their luster. This 5-star army is so powerful. What should we do? What should we do? Seeing that Deridar was at his wits' end, the expressions of the generals around him changed. The army couldn't do without a leader. But now that the leader was panicking, what should they do? "General, let's escape now. The 5-star army's cavalry is only 5 miles away." "Escape?" Riddle instinctively shook his head. "We can't leave. We are only the vanguard. The main force of the army is still here." Yes, this time, the Ares dynasty sent a total of 150,000 troops. Now, only the 10,000 cavalry and 40,000 infantry of the vanguard lost the battle. They still had 110,000 troops in their hands. With this, they could fight any powerful enemy in a battle. Reporting. Just as Ridhar shook his head, another scout rushed into the tent. The moment he entered the tent, this young general didn't even dare to raise his head as he cried out. "Reporting to the general, we have discovered a large number of 5-star army cavalry on our left and right. They are currently moving towards us. 5-star army's cavalry on our left and right. What are our soldiers doing?" Another piece of bad news came. Riddle was furious when he heard it. He roared loudly as if he wanted to eat someone. The scout was already scared to the point of kneeling on the ground. He didn't dare to explain anything. Fortunately, there were other generals who spoke. "General, our soldiers on the mountain were scattered by the cannons of the 5-star army." "Ah!" At this moment, Riddle finally came back to his senses. After 2 breaths, he let out a long sigh and said, "What the hell is going on? Those cannons are really that powerful. Is the heavens trying to destroy our army? General, let's just retreat. The morale of the army is in chaos. It's not a good time to fight the 5-star army. Why don't we retreat first and think of a plan?" Seeing how Riddle was still depressed about the loss of the war, the other captains became anxious. Even if Riddle wanted to die, they didn't want to. However, if they escaped without a military order, they would be beheaded even if they returned to the Aries dynasty. Thus, they had to convince Riddle. Ridhar, who had long run out of ideas, looked at the generals requesting for retreat and knew that even if he wanted to continue fighting, there would not be any results. The morale of the army was at rock bottom. There was no need to continue fighting. Okay, retreat, retreat. Inform the vanguard to set up defenses and buy time for our main force to retreat. Helplessly, despite the unwillingness in his heart, Ridar had no choice but to give such an order. Chapter 13:22. The Aries dynasty's army retreated. Without any preparation, they didn't even have time to tidy up their tents. Many of the military supplies were left behind as well. Thus, Ridhar only managed to escape with 50,000 cavalrymen. 150,000 soldiers, 50,000 cavalrymen, and 50,000 infantrymen. A small number of them died in the cannon fire and cavalry attacks. Nizam and the other generals died in battle. 70,000 people were captured, including Nurahan and the others. At the same time, they also seized a large amount of food, military equipment, and war horses. From the reports of the scouts and light cavalry that pursued the Aries dynasty, Ridhar escaped with 50,000 cavalrymen for hundreds of thousands of miles until they left the Ely region and returned to the Aries dynasty's territory. The victory was decided in one battle. It was carried out in an unstoppable manner without the slightest hesitation. The battle from the beginning to the end took less than 2 days. It ended with the 5-star army's complete victory. In the main tent of the 5-star army, Nurhan knelt on the ground with his hands tied. Opposite him was young Chinong, who was sitting there drinking tea and reading the battle report. In this battle, the 5-star army used firearms to open the way. The enemy's army collapsed and their morale was at an all-time low. In the end, they only lost less than 500 cavalrymen to achieve a great victory. As the Aries dynasty's army retreated from the battlefield, it could be imagined that the 5-star army would have no opponents in the future. It was only a matter of time before they conquered this place. The result of the battle report made Yang Chendong in a good mood. When he looked at the kneeling Nurahan, his tone was not very strict. This king asks you, if the 5-star army enters the Aries dynasty, can you resist? Nurahan, whose hands were tied behind his back, was already scared out of his wits. Or rather, he was completely shocked by the 5-star army's firearms. Now that he heard Yang Chendong's question, he shook his head without hesitation. I can't. This result made Yang Chendong even more satisfied. Good, you can be considered a sensible person. Since that's the case, are you willing to go back and persuade your comrades to surrender? You have to know that this is not only an opportunity for you, but also an opportunity for the Aries dynasty. Otherwise, when the 5-star army enters the Aries dynasty, they will win easily. At that time, who knows how many more people will die? This was the reason why Yang Chendong called Nurahan. If they could take over the Aries dynasty without bloodshed, of course, it would be for the best. Even if he couldn't achieve it, letting Nurahan leave would also make him a troublemaker. At that time, even if he could only persuade a small number of people to surrender, it would be a good thing. Nurahan to the Aries dynasty was to survive. Were to the Aries dynasties to the Aries dynasty. When he thought of the power of the 5-star firearms and the fact that he didn't want to see his country's citizens and army being slaughtered, he wanted to do something about it. Now that the opportunity had come, there was no reason not to seize it. He immediately nodded and said, "The surrendered general is willing to surrender and is willing to persuade his comrades to surrender to the 5-star army." Such a cooperative Nurahan naturally made Yang Chendong very happy. Good, surrender to the Aries. Come, untie the general and take out 1,000,000 silver for him to use. If he has any requests, help him. Are you satisfied? Not only was his life guaranteed, but he also received 1,000,000 silver. How many things could he do? Nurahan had no reason to refuse. He knelt on the ground again and said with determination, I thank Bugnam of Gojoseon for thinking so highly of me. This time, I will do my best and go through fire and water. Good, I hope you can do what you say. If you dare to play any tricks, then when I catch you, I promise I will let you experience what it means to live a life worse than death. After giving the sweet jujube, it was time to swing the big stick. Yang Chendong's voice carried a bit of coldness. I don't dare, I don't dare. Nurahan's body shook. He believed that the 5-star army definitely had the ability to do so. He didn't want to die and didn't want to see his country's citizens die innocently. He knew that he had no other choice. Nurahan was let go just like that. Before leaving, other than writing a surrender letter, there were no other measures. Because of this, Beta Persei worriedly reminded him. It was clear that he had doubts about this person's loyalty. Don't worry, everyone knows that he was captured by us. Even if he faked his surrender, when he returns to the Aries dynasty, he won't be heavily used. Anyone with ambition wouldn't do such a stupid thing. Also, you have to have confidence in the 5-star army. This time, he was already scared. Even his spine was broken. He won't dare to be our enemy. Regarding this point, Yang Chendong was 100 times more confident. Why did so many traitors appear in the future? Wasn't it because the Japanese's weapons and individual combat ability were too strong? On the other hand, the 5-star army was much stronger than the Japanese at that time. Anyone who understood would know what to do. On the other hand, if Nurahan's mentality changed, then what was the difference between killing him and not killing him? In the end, it was just a loss of 1,000,000 taels of silver. And if he persuaded more people to surrender, how could 1,000,000 taels of silver compare? He was willing to take this gamble. Yili's first army led by Bai Shuang, Yarkyang's 5-star army led by Shi Wanshan, Turpan was destroyed, and the Aries dynasty and Kazakh's reinforcements were either pushed back or eliminated. It would take him a few days to reach the first city. There must be an explanation for this matter. Otherwise, how could they answer the 6th young master when he asked? As the most trusted people of Yang Chendong, they were also entrusted with the important task of being in charge of the specific matters of the first city. The 3 of them must give an explanation, otherwise, they would be incompetent. We still have to send someone to urge them. Give them 2 more days. There must be a result. As the first city's governor, Yu Mian was a scholar. In the past, he didn't think highly of generals. However, what he had seen and heard in the past few years made him clearly realize how important it was to have a powerful army. It could bring earth-shattering changes to the lives of the people. His mentality had also changed because of this. 2 days? What if the other party still doesn't reply when the time is up? Yang Si didn't seem to be satisfied with this answer. However, considering that Yu Qian and his son were talents that even the young master respected, he didn't speak so aggressively. Yu Mian, who was suddenly stumped, didn't know how to answer for a moment. Tiger's Mane, who was watching the show from the side, felt that it was about time. He said as if he was helping Yu Mian out. If they don't answer, beat them. How dare they ignore the 6th young master's words? How can we not teach them a lesson? This was the true intention of Tiger's Mane and Yang Si. To put it bluntly, they advocated using force to solve everything. However, Yu Mian had always disagreed. He always wanted to solve the problem through negotiation, so they waited and waited. Now that Yang Chendong was coming, they couldn't delay any longer. Therefore, the 2 of them called Yu Mian to put pressure on him. After all, the first city was sending troops. If the governor didn't cooperate, there would be some trouble. Beat them? This answer was clearly out of Yu Mian's expectations. Although he didn't reject generals, he still didn't like fighting and killing. It would be best if he could solve the problem through negotiation. Well, should we talk to Shiheng again? If it doesn't work, we can reduce the number of people we want. Chapter 1323. Yu Mian thought that it was too much to ask for 1,000,000 Han people. If he could ask for less, perhaps Shiheng would agree and a war could be avoided. Absolutely not. Yang Si immediately refused and then he gave the reason. Young master's words cannot be changed, Yangtze said with a serious face, causing Yu Mian to sigh. Of course, he knew that Yang Chendong's words were like an imperial edict in the entire Yangtze and the five-star army. Unless he was willing to take it back, no one could change it. However, when he thought about the war that was about to begin, especially with the Han people, who knew how many of his brothers would die, his expression became unsightly. Noticing the change in Yu Mian's expression, Tiger's mane sighed in his heart. A scholar was a scholar after all. He was still too soft-hearted. However, some problems that could not be solved politically could not be solved without a war. City Lord Yu, you don't have to worry too much. We are determined to win this war. The fifth Master Lu has already arrived at the first city and is ready to attack the city at any time. As long as we win, we don't have to worry about the other party not agreeing to our request. In that case, we will immediately rescue 1 million Han people. Isn't this what we want? When he said that they could save 1 million Han people, Yu Mian's expression became much better. He could not help but sigh. Yes, 1 million Han people can walk out of the abyss of suffering. It's worth it just for this point. Then I'll write a letter to inform Shiheng and give them 2 more days. Yu Mian finally agreed to send troops. Tiger's mane and Yangtze both breathed a sigh of relief. They began to look forward to the arrival of 2 days later. Tulu City. Shiheng was sulking in his house with a face full of anger. Beside him, the 2 generals Zhou Qing and Jiang Xian also stood there with bitter expressions. They did not dare to speak for a long time. Reporting, First City's City Lord Yu Mian has sent a letter to Marquis. A bodyguard jogged into the courtyard and placed a letter sealed with wax on the stone table in front of Shiheng. Then, he carefully retreated. He could tell that his master was in a bad mood. At this moment, he didn't dare to stay any longer. The letter was placed on the stone table. After about 5 minutes, Shiheng snorted coldly and looked at his most trusted aide, Zhou Qing, and said, "Open it and read it." Zhou Qing did not dare to hesitate and immediately reached out to take the letter. Then, the contents were transmitted to the 3 of them. By the time he finished reading the letter, Shiheng's expression had turned even uglier. He was so angry that his lips were trembling. This, even Yu Mian is forcing Marquis' hand? No wonder Shiheng was so angry. When Yu Mian sent a letter to explain that the previous sneak attack had angered Bugnam of Gojoseon, his life had not been easy. First, Yu Mian made a request. If he wanted to solve this matter, Bai Ming had to send over 1 million Han people to settle the matter. When he received this letter, Shiheng naturally did not dare to make the decision himself. So, he sent someone to send it to Bai Ming's capital. In the capital, Su Yozhen had already received the news and wanted to cooperate with Shiheng to persuade Zhu Qiyu. However, this descendant of the Zhu family still had a backbone. Under the bottom line of not ceding land, not compensating, and not marrying into the country, the acting emperor did not listen to the advice of the ministers. Instead, he decided to fight. On this matter, a portion of the military officials agreed, but more importantly, the group of eunuchs also supported him. Gao Rang, the director of the East Depot, directly requested to send his nephew Gao Yu as the army supervisor to fight against the 5-star army. In this matter, Gao Rang had won the first prize, which was exactly what Zhu Qiyu wanted. Even Steward Jining, who had wanted to dissuade the emperor from agreeing to the 5-star army's request, had no choice but to change his mind and support this battle to resolve the problem. Jining appeared to be a lofty official at Zhu Qiyu's side, and he could make many decisions. But in the end, his authority had been bestowed upon him by the emperor. If he did not have the emperor's support, then he was even lower than a dog. His position dictated that he had to follow the emperor's lead in all matters. With the support of the eunuch group, Zhu Qiyu issued an imperial edict, mobilizing 200,000 infantrymen from the capital and appointing Gao Yu as the army's supervisor. A few outstanding youths from the great clans were appointed as generals. They were to head to Tulu City and fight against the 5-star army to demonstrate Bai Ming's military strength. As if dissatisfied with Shiheng's previous performance, Zhu Qiu clearly stated in the imperial edict that the battle against the five-star army would be led by the great general of the Liaodun cavalry, Fang Dingshan, with the army supervisor Gao Yu as his support. This was tantamount to weakening Shi Heng's authority in the army. As a result, his position as commander-in-chief had become empty and transparent. This was what had truly angered Shi Heng. Now Yu Mian had sent a letter urging him, and he had only given him 2 days. If he didn't agree, then he would fight. How could he not be vexed? But no matter how angry he was, he still had the position of commander-in-chief. There were still things that needed to be done. He looked at Zhou Qing, who had put down the letter. Jiang Xian, who was still standing to the side, asked, "Speak. Do the two of you have any good suggestions?" It didn't matter if they had an idea or not. Since their master had asked them to reply, they had to force their way in. Jiang Xian cupped his fists and said, "Marquis, we must take His Majesty's letter seriously. We have no chance of winning against the five-star army." Jiang Xian's answer clearly displeased Shi Heng. He first gave the other party a look that said, "You're an idiot. Of course, Marquis knows. But with the Emperor's imperial edict, I'm afraid that Gao Yu and Fang Dingshan are plotting something. What can I do? Ever since Gao Yu had brought 200,000 soldiers to Tulu City a few days ago, he would often close the door and discuss matters with Fang Dingshan. Moreover, he had never notified Shi Heng to participate. Just this fact alone made him furious. In his heart, he didn't know how many times he had cursed Gao Rang and the group of eunuchs behind him. Of course, Fang Dingshan wasn't any better. He was also viewed by Shi Heng as a traitor. Jiang Xian was reprimanded, but there was no anger on his face. He was just giving a simple reply. "You told me to say it, so you can't blame me if I say it wrong. You say it." Unsatisfied with Jiang Xian's reply, Shi Heng's gaze fell on Zhou Qing. Compared to Jiang Xian, Zhou Qing was smarter and had more ideas. This was the main reason why Shi Heng placed him in an important position. At this time, he calmly cupped his fists and said, "Marquis, you don't have to be angry. We just need to send the letter out. As for how we do it, what does it have to do with us?" "What does it have to do with us? What do you mean?" For a moment, Shi Heng didn't understand. His face was filled with confusion. Zhou Qing laughed confidently and said, "Marquis, isn't the Emperor going to fight with the five-star army? But he doesn't know the strength of the opponent. There's no chance of winning this battle. Since we know that we're going to lose, why don't we hide further away and leave the battlefield to them? When the time comes and we lose, it has nothing to do with Marquis. On the contrary, you can stand up and turn the tide. At that time, isn't it obvious who's stronger? Stay out of it?" Pondering the meaning of Zhou Qing's words, Shi Heng seemed to suddenly understand. "You're saying that we should watch the show from the sidelines and watch others fail to distinguish ourselves? Marquis is brilliant." Zhou Qing hurriedly flattered and then retreated to the side with a smile. After receiving Zhou Qing's reminder, Shi Heng thought carefully and confirmed that this was the best way to deal with it. Wasn't Marquis dissatisfied? Then it's good that we withdraw from here and stay far away. This way, if we lose the battle, they can't blame me. Of course, for the sake of the future, he decided to write a letter to Yu Mian to express his difficulties. He also told him that Gao Rang had brought 200,000 soldiers to Tala City. This was not collusion, but a transaction. If one wanted to be understood, they had to pay a price. Otherwise, who would believe them? What would they use to form a friendship in the future? Shi Heng was a person who did not have the concept of country. In his eyes, there was only wealth and power. For this, he did not hesitate to sacrifice the interests of the country. It had to be said that using such a person was a tragedy for Ming. After making his decision, Shi Heng quickly took action. He did 3 things in a row. First, he wrote a letter to Yu Mian in his own name, explaining his difficulties and the situation in Talas City, expressing his powerlessness. Second, he sent Yu Mian's letter to Fang Dingshan and Gao Yu, handing over the difficult problem. Third, He claimed that his health was not good and decided to go to the Wan-All department to recuperate. Yu Mian's letter was quickly delivered to Fang Dingshan and Gao Yu. The threat in the letter was nothing to the two who had already decided to fight. On the contrary, they were more interested in the letter written by Shiheng. When they saw that he was leaving Talis City, the two of them were overjoyed. In any case, Shiheng still had the title of Commander-in-Chief and had operated here for a period of time. He had many trusted aides in the army. This person's presence would be a great hindrance to the two of them. If he could leave now, it would be of great benefit to their ability to command. This was something that they wished for, so how could they not agree? The two of them reached a consensus and agreed to Shiheng's departure. They even expressed their condolences. After receiving the agreement, Shiheng left Talis City in the afternoon, as if he did not want to get involved in this troublesome place. Without Shiheng guarding Talis City, the military power was quickly divided between Fang Dingshan and Gao Yu. The two of them had 100,000 cavalry, 300,000 infantry, and 400,000 troops. The power of commanding 400,000 troops made the two of them somewhat arrogant. Needless to say, since they had an army, they naturally had to consider the matter of war. The two of them immediately made preparations to leave the city and fight the five-star army. At the same time, Yu Mian also received Shiheng's reply. Chapter 13:24. With the existence of the intelligence department, every move in Toulouse City was naturally not hidden from them. They had already inquired about the matter of Gao Yu supervising the army. But even so, Shiheng's letter had its value. At least from this letter, it could be seen that the Ming army was preparing to take action. "We have no choice but to fight." Yu Mian looked at the letter and shook his head helplessly. He cupped his fist and said to Tiger's Mane and Yangtze, "Generals, I'm not good at war. I'll leave everything to you. Just tell me what you want to do and how you need my cooperation. Now I'll mobilize the people in the city to be ready to support the front line at any time." Before the army and horses moved, the provisions moved first. Without enough money and food, it was impossible to win a big war or a victory. Yu Mian turned around and went to make preparations. Tiger's Mane and Yangtze, who were left behind, were both happy. They were warlike people from the bottom of their hearts. Now that they had a chance to show off, of course, they would not be polite. After a simple discussion, they raised a tent and made preparations before the war. Both sides were ready for the war. Whether it was the beginning city or Toulouse City, they were shrouded in a tense atmosphere before the war. Yang Qindong, who was more than 100 miles away, was moving from Shajing City to the beginning city under the protection of the Black Cavalry. In Shajing City, Yang Qindong once again met with the commander of the new Second Army. Naturally, he was comforted. In the end, Yang Qindong also promised that if there was a need, he would prioritize the participation of the new Second Army in the upcoming war. This greatly moved Shibi, and he expressed that he would train his troops well and be ready to be summoned at any time. After Yang Qindong escaped from Shajing City and was heading to the beginning city, he received a telegram from Tiger's Mane. After learning that Ming was not going to give in and still wanted to fight, he sneered and said, "I really didn't expect that there would be a result so soon after I promised to do something else." Originally, Yang Qindong was prepared to find trouble with the Ming army after reaching the beginning city. Now it seemed that they were more anxious than he was. Even so, he was not in a hurry to leave. He might as well watch from the side and wait for the right opportunity to give them a taste of their own medicine. It would definitely be very painful and very pleasurable. "Men, set up camp. First, send the cavalry scouts to seal off this area. Do not allow anyone to spy on the appearance of our army here. Also, inform the sergeant commander to come and see me. Also, send a report to Tiger's Mane, Toulouse City." Shiheng listened to his subordinate's suggestion and left the city. The courtyard he lived in was quickly occupied by Gao Yu, the military supervisor. Looking at the manor that occupied several hectares of land, Gao Yu's face revealed a satisfied expression. Although in terms of luxury, this place naturally couldn't compare to the capital, the mountains were high, and the emperor was far away. No one cared about him, and he could do whatever he wanted. This was what satisfied him the most. Gao Yu was not a eunuch. He entered the East Faction Guards with the recommendation of his uncle, Gao Rang, and got an official position. When it came to women, he never knew how to restrain himself. After he took over this garden, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie sent over dozens of beauties to offer to him. Since Su Yozhen gave Zhu Qiu the idea of bribing officials and criminals, the rich people have benefited from it. Some rich people have even gained a lot of benefits because of this. Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie are the representatives among them. They were originally the sons of rich families. They belonged to the kind of people who were idle and didn't want to be high or low. Originally, they wanted to be the second generation of a rich family, but they didn't want the imperial court to allow them to buy officials. They didn't take money seriously, so they spent a lot of money and each got a 5th-rank military officer position. They were respectively awarded the position of Wu Jie General and Wu De General. From an idle son of a rich family to a 5th-rank general in the imperial court, this huge contrast made the two of them wild with joy. At the same time, it also made them even more ambitious for revenge. They hoped to climb to a higher position and bring glory to their family from then on. They had come to Toulouse City with the army to make military contributions. If they really made military contributions and were willing to use money, wouldn't their future be limitless? The two came to the army with great ambitions. Their first goal was to curry favor with Gao Yu. Unlike the two of them, Gao Yu had an uncle who was the director of the East Faction Guards. In the Great Ming dynasty, there was no need to doubt the status of eunuchs. As close officials of the emperor, they could often decide someone's life and death and future with a single word. Moreover, Gao Yu was the supervisor of the army, so they naturally had to curry favor with him. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as they made Gao Yu happy, even if they didn't make any contributions, they would be praised to the skies when they returned to the capital. On the contrary, if they offended this person, even if they made a great contribution, they wouldn't be able to enjoy it. In the manner, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie did everything they could to please Gao Yu. The Gao Yu they spoke of was really hard to find on the ground, and there were few ordinary heroes in the world. Even Gao Yu, who was used to flattery, couldn't help but feel a little smug. "Army supervisor, no one can match your brilliance. Even Marquis Wukinghao has to give way." Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie were excited when they heard this. They could lead the troops alone. Wasn't it time to show off? At that moment, both of them nodded excitedly and patted their chests to promise that they would not let Gao Yu down. The two of them went back excitedly and waited for a night. Just before noon the next day, the order was issued. Li Keguang got the position of the left vanguard, leading 10,000 troops. Ho Xiangjie got the position of the right vanguard, also leading 10,000 troops. As the vanguard, they went straight to the origin city from Talis City. They wanted to appear at the origin city at lightning speed and catch the enemy off guard. Then, the main army would appear one after another and complete the encirclement of the origin city. In order to win this battle, Ming could be said to have paid a great price. Among the 200,000 reinforcements, there were 20,000 of them who were equipped with firearms. Among them, there were 5,000 God cannons and 5,000 God guns, 500 improved God cloth cannons that could shoot 300 meters away, and 2,000 new repeating guns. Speaking of repeating guns, this was based on the modified Type 81 automatic rifle that Yang Chendong gave to Jining. At that time, Yang Xie used this gun to exchange for 1,000,000 caddies of copper and iron. It could be said that he solved the problem of burning eyebrows. After Ming got the Type 81 automatic rifle, they called all the skilled craftsmen. After so many years of hard work, they finally made a replica repeating gun that could hold 4 bullets and fire continuously. Because it was all handmade, there was no so-called lathe to match it. The manufacturing power was very limited, and it was easy to have problems. For example, the bullets were not on the scale, and things like jamming happened from time to time. Even so, it was not a small achievement to create a 4-style repeating gun. The shooting range of the gun was increased by 20 meters, reaching 120 meters. It was regarded as a treasure by Ming firearms camp. The firearms camp with 20,000 people was one of Gao Yu's biggest trump cards. Both sides had firearms. The power was directly ignored by him. They had a lot of troops, and they had the help of 100,000 strong Liaodong iron cavalry. He was determined to take down the origin city. Chapter 1325. Gao Yu had once investigated the information and knew that the beginning city had once been surrounded by the Ming army. They had only failed because the siege was not successful. But this time, he had the red coat cannon and flintlock. As long as the siege was successful, he was confident that he could take down the city. That was the beginning city, which was regarded as the headquarters of the 5-star army on the grassland. There were countless good things inside. Once they could take down the beginning city, it would not only mean that the 5-star army had suffered a heavy blow on the grassland, but they would also gain countless benefits. Gao Yu's face was full of excitement. After discussing the specific military plan with Fang Dingshan, he returned to the manor. Unlike usual, he did not sleep with any woman that night. Instead, he went to bed early to prepare for the army's departure tomorrow. The beginning city. The intelligence personnel lurking in Toulouse City had sent news through telegrams, explaining the unusual movements of the Ming army. In the headquarters of the new army group, Tiger's Mane called his 3 corps commanders and a group of officers to discuss the military battle plan together. For 2 hours, the plan was revised again and again. Finally, there was a plan that everyone was satisfied with. In the end, Tiger's Mane and Yangtze made the final decision, and all the military directors received their respective tasks. When the meeting was about to end, Tiger's Mane said, "Everyone, this battle is the first big battle since the establishment of our new army group. The goal is very simple. Seriously speaking, it's just a small test for us. But I want to remind you that the 6th young master is watching behind us. This time, not only do we have to win the battle, but we also have to show our best side and let the 6th young master see the military style of our new army group. If you perform well, you will naturally be rewarded after the battle. On the other hand, if anyone attacks at will because of carelessness or disobeying orders, which leads to changes on the battlefield or even losses, then you will be punished by military law. Do you understand?" "Understood." Hearing that Yang Chenong was watching from a short distance away, everyone perked up. To be able to perform well in front of the 6th young master was the hope of many. All of them straightened their backs with an eager expression. After the meeting, the entire first city began to move. The entire new army of more than 100,000 soldiers was quickly mobilized. A solemn atmosphere spread throughout the city. It was June, and the grassland had become warm. Although it was not as hot as the south, where it was more than 30 degrees below zero, the highest temperature during the day was about 27 or 28 degrees. Especially at noon, when the sun shone on people, there was a roasting smell. In order to avoid the army being roasted under the sun, Gao Yu and Fang Dingshan had a discussion. At 3 o'clock in the morning, when the sky was still dark, they let the army out of the city, and then quickly rushed in the direction of the first city. As the left and right vanguard, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjia's mission was to charge into Saihan Mountain immediately, and open up the path to the beginning city to ensure that the army could travel smoothly. In order to complete the mission and take down this place, the 2 of them had done a lot of work. They even took the initiative to increase the silver reward for military merit. They would rather supplement some of it themselves so that they could have a good start. Under the stimulation of the silver, the morale of the soldiers was greatly boosted. Everyone patted their chests, and looked like they were going to risk their lives. Under the excited momentum, the 2 vanguard armies totaling 20,000 soldiers came to the foot of Saihan Mountain and launched an attack. However, what made them depressed was that the 5-star army on the mountain had already retreated. Not even a shadow could be seen. This result naturally made the 2 of them a little discouraged. The feeling of punching cotton made them want to vomit blood. "What's going on? Why can't I see the 5-star army? Could it be that they received the news in advance and escaped? Li Keguang's face was gloomy, and he said with a gloomy face. Ho Xiangjia on the side didn't look so dispirited. Instead, his eyes turned quickly. When he saw that no one was paying attention to him, he leaned in front of Li Keguang and whispered, "Brotherly, this may be a good thing." Good thing? Li Keguang looked puzzled. He even looked at Ho Xiangjia as if he was looking at an idiot. Yes, it's a good thing, Ho Xiangjia said with a very confident look. Brotherly, the military supervisor doesn't know what happened here. Isn't it up to us to say what happened? Li Keguang, who somewhat understood Ho Xiangjia's meaning, suddenly trembled. Then, he looked at him in disbelief and said, "It can't be. Are you saying that we have to fake military merit?" In the great Ming dynasty, it was not uncommon to fake military merit. This was especially true in the later stages of the war with slave Jian. Because the imperial court had strict requirements that the reward for beheading the enemy was a certain amount, the great Ming soldiers who couldn't defeat slave Jian on the battlefield would indiscriminately slaughter ordinary people in order to obtain the reward and then turn in their heads to the imperial court. For this reason, it was unknown how many people of the great Ming dynasty died because of it. In contrast, Ho Xiangjia's idea wasn't unreliable. At least they had already captured Xi'an Mountain, seized this territory, and completed the military order. Under Ho Xiangjia's guidance, Li Keguang quickly agreed. After all, this was something that was beneficial to the two of them. Afterward, the two of them sent out scouts to report back, saying that they had fought a huge battle with the 5 astral army on Mount Xi'an. They had defeated their opponents and successfully occupied Mount Xi'an, an important military location. They had also killed many 5 astral army soldiers. When the battle report was sent back to Gao Yu, he was naturally overjoyed. He also sent this news to General Fang Dingshan. "General Fang, look, we have won a great victory." "And not bad." Looking at this battle report, a satisfied expression flashed across Fang Dingshan's face. In fact, he wasn't optimistic about the 200,000 troops brought by Gao Yu. This army was composed of new recruits. An army that had never seen blood and didn't have war horses would not be at an advantage when fighting on the grassland. However, they had a good start in the first battle. This was a good thing for the morale of the army, so he was naturally happy. There was even a faint hope in his heart. Perhaps cooperating with Gao Yu this time would be far more fruitful than cooperating with Shirhan. After the news of the victory of the Baiming army in the first battle spread, the morale of the army improved a lot. Even the speed of their journey increased a little. As the vanguard, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjia were praised by Gao Yu and received new orders. They were to continue to move forward and strive to reach the beginning city as soon as possible to catch the 5-star army off guard. If they could take the opportunity to enter the city, it would definitely be the first merit. When they saw the 2 words, first merit, the two of them were naturally excited. The victory on Xi'an Mountain made them underestimate the enemy. After all, they didn't really fight with the 5-star army. In order not to let the people have panic thoughts and emotions, the Baiming imperial court didn't publicize the power of the 5-star army. Ignorant people didn't care. The two of them led 20,000 infantrymen down Xi'an Mountain and quickly went to the beginning city. In order to achieve the first merit, they didn't even leave any troops at the foot of the mountain. This alone showed their incompetence and inexperience. The 2 generals left Xi'an Mountain excitedly and went straight to the beginning city. In order to snatch the first merit, they didn't stop to rest. They rushed day and night and arrived in front of the beginning city on the 3rd day. The sudden appearance of 20,000 Baiming army outside the city seemed to be greatly beyond the expectations of the 5-star army. The city gate quickly closed and showed a panicked look. Haha, the 5-star army was really unprepared. The scene in front of him made Li Keguang very excited. However, when he turned around to look at the infantrymen behind him, there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. It's a pity that the army is very tired after rushing for days. Otherwise, we could have won the battle. Yes, the beginning city's city wall is very tall. It's not something that can be defeated by tired soldiers. I think we should wait for a while, Ho Xiangjie said with a look of pity. Facing the beginning city's city wall that had been reinforced more than once, it was very difficult to take it down. Moreover, the Ming army had rushed for days and their combat power was less than 30% of their usual strength. If they attacked the city now, it was no different from courting death. The two generals felt that it was a pity that they couldn't attack the city immediately. However, they didn't know that if they attacked the city now, they would only die. The beginning city wasn't something that could be easily attacked. Moreover, the 5-star army in the city was already prepared. If they attacked now, they would be courting death. Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie, who were unaware of the situation, thought that they had seized a great merit and had blocked the 5-star army within the city gates. Thus, they hurriedly sent someone to send a message to the rear troops, exaggerating their merits. In order to make it seem more realistic, they even added a lot of merits. For example, they had fought a great battle with the 5-star army outside the city and had won, sending them back into the city. The battle report was sent by the cavalry to Gao Yu, who was not far from Talis City. It made him exclaim happily, "Ha ha ha, the two of you are really famous generals. Well done. Come, inform General Fan of this news. At the same time, order the army to speed up and rush to the beginning city as soon as possible to join General Li and General Ho." Gao Yu, who had underestimated the 5-star army and overestimated the strength of his army, was excited. It seemed that the great merit was in front of him. At this moment, he looked down on Shiheng even more. Even he, who had never led an army, could besiege the beginning city in a short time. He didn't know why Wu Qiho would be afraid of the 5-star army. Now it seemed that it was not an exaggeration to call him a stupid general. Fang Dingshan, who was leading 100,000 cavalry, also received the news quickly. He was not surprised by it. After all, the beginning city had been besieged before. Now, it was just a repeat of the past. It was nothing. He just hoped that this trip would not be as fruitless as last time. Under the beginning city, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie, who had rested for an afternoon and night, walked out of their respective big tents with radiant faces. Then, they ordered the troops to attack the city. The 20,000 Ming army, who didn't encounter any opponents, also had high morale. After an order, they launched the first attack on the south gate of the beginning city in front of them. Chapter 13:26. The Ming army took turns to attack. Every time, 1,000 Ming army soldiers would launch a probing attack. The two generals were even prepared to be heavily injured. However, when they really attacked the city, they realized that the 5-star army was only putting up a hasty resistance. It wasn't too intense. It gave people the feeling that if the city wasn't high enough, they might have already broken through. Ha! After a morning of fighting, Li Keguang believed that he had seen the strength of the 5-star army. He laughed loudly and said to Ho Xiangjie, "Brother Ho, did you see that? The 5-star army is only SOSO. We can increase our attack in the afternoon." "That's right." Ho Xiangjie also had the same view. Then, he changed the strategy of attacking the city. This time, the number of soldiers attacking the city increased from 1,000 to 2,000. On the tower outside the city, Yang Si was looking at the Ming army leisurely. He didn't look nervous at all. It was as if this battle had nothing to do with him. "Commander Yang, the Ming army has sent 2,000 people to attack the city this time." Li Yun ran to Yang Si and gave a standard military salute. The recon division's learning and training ended after they dealt with the 10,000 Ming Liaodong cavalry. Li Yun returned to the logistics headquarters and was promoted from a company commander to a battalion commander. "Yes, you can send 1,000 recruits and 200 veterans to help defend the city. Tell the soldiers not to be afraid of death. On the battlefield, only those who are afraid of death will die faster. Warriors who aren't afraid of death can't be killed." Yang Si looked at Li Yun with satisfaction and admiration. "Yes." After saluting, Li Yun turned around to make the arrangements. Yang Si was left laughing. He believed that the Ming army wouldn't have guessed that the troops defending the city this time would mainly be recruits sent by the foreign races from the logistics headquarters. This was the result of his discussion with Tigers Mane and Yu Mian. They reported it to Yang Chendong and got his approval. In the eyes of the Five-Star Army, the Ming army was as weak and docile as a lamb. This was a group of vile people who spoke of benevolence, righteousness, and morality every day, but actually did despicable and shameless things behind their backs. Every day, they opened their mouths and talked about the words of Confucius and the words of the saints. But in reality, they were just people who recognized a few more words and knew how to write some useless poems. If it wasn't for the great Ming dynasty's generous treatment, these scholars wouldn't have anyone to serve them. They wouldn't even know how to cook or plow the fields. They would just be pure parasites. In the later period of the Great Ming, it was about using benevolence to rule the world and using benevolence to convince people. Many virtuous paragons believed that they could rely on their silver tongue to wander the world in an invincible position and play with their enemies in the palm of their hands. Such arrogant people were already outdated in this world. If it weren't for the Five-Star Army's protection, they would have been slapped in the face a long time ago. That's right. The Ming Imperial Court was currently under the protection of the Five-Star Army. Looking at its geographical location, other than the southern Ming dynasty in the south, the surrounding areas were all occupied by the Five-Star Army. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Ming was a lonely place. In other words, as long as the Five-Star Army didn't make a move against them, Ming would be safe and auspicious. For an army like this to think that they were the best in the world and look down on the Five-Star Army, it had to be said that it was truly laughable. To deal with an army like this, the Five-Star Army didn't need to send out any elites. They didn't even need to send out a regular army. As long as they sent out the new recruits from the logistics headquarters who had never been on the battlefield, it would be enough to deal with everything. They could pretend that they weren't a match for the enemy and achieve the goal of mobilizing the enemy's army. They could also train the soldiers on the battlefield. This was something that Yang Si naturally had to do. This was why Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie didn't feel that the Five-Star Army was powerful. This was also something that the Five-Star Army did on purpose. They were using the strategy of luring the snake out of its hole. Since the Ming army took the initiative to provoke them, they had to be ruthless. This was to prevent them from coming out to cause trouble while the Five-Star Army was fighting. Since they were going to be ruthless, they had to defeat as many of the Ming army as possible. However, if they were too ruthless, it was inevitable that the Ming army would be afraid of the enemy and retreat to defend Tala City. Yang Chendong didn't want to be unable to annihilate a large number of the enemy's forces in the battle. Therefore, they had to retreat step by step and show weakness step by step in order to lure more Ming army out of Tala's city and surround them in one fell swoop. In order to achieve this goal, after Yang Si and the others discussed and reported to Yang Chendong, they were even prepared to give up the outer city. Now it seemed that the plan was going smoothly. The ignorant Ming army was indeed fooled. The siege continued and both sides suffered losses. There were more than one crisis at the south gate of the outer city, but they were all defeated because the Ming army's forces were too few. This made Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie regret for a while. They could only hope that the main army would appear and then take advantage of their superior forces to occupy the beginning city and obtain great merits. 3 days later, the main force of the Ming army finally arrived. Gao Yu appeared on top of the beginning city's gate with a total of 150,000 troops, accompanied by 20,000 firearms barracks. As for the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry led by Fang Dingshan, they didn't go with them. Instead, they wandered around in the vicinity. This showed Fang Dingshan's wisdom. He didn't think highly of Gao Yu as the army supervisor, so he didn't go with him. The advantage of this was that once the situation changed, they could evacuate immediately, and their strength wouldn't be damaged. Without Butcher Zhang, we won't be eating hairy pigs. Although Gao Yu was a little unhappy about Fang Dingshan's unwillingness to cooperate, wasn't this an opportunity? If he could take down the beginning city without this person's help, wouldn't the great merit fall on him? Based on the fact that his uncle was Gao Rang, the director of the East Factory, Gao Yu didn't think that anyone would have the guts to steal his credit. Therefore, as soon as he arrived at the beginning city, he called Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie and gave them a big reward for their good performance. Then, he asked about the situation of the war and saw the Bai Ming army besieging the city and the 5-star army in a stalemate. "Haha, good, you two did a good job and made a great contribution. I, the army supervisor, will put in a good word for you in front of the emperor. Next, I will give each of you 20,000 infantry. I hope you can continue to work hard and make new contributions." Gao Yu laughed happily. The two people who were praised were also very excited. They immediately said that as long as they had enough troops, they could take down the beginning city and asked Gao Yu to wait for the good news. Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie, who were praised and entrusted with important tasks, launched a more fierce attack the next morning. For a time, the beginning city was filled with shouts and shouts. There would be blood splashing on the south city tower every moment. It was very tragic. It was unknown whether it was because they were too excited or too agitated, but Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie didn't notice that the number of casualties among the infantry they sent out wasn't many. On the contrary, the number of injured soldiers was very considerable. Of course, they would not think that this was originally the 5-star army's mercy. Once this army was surrounded, these Bai Ming army soldiers might become prisoners. They were Han Chinese, so it was better not to kill them. Another 2 days of iron and blood besieging the city. The Bai Ming army had to retreat because 3,000 soldiers were killed and 15,000 were injured. This also made Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie depressed. In their view, the besieging army was about to succeed several times, but with the 5-star army's counterattacks, they had to retreat. The feeling of failure when they were about to win made them very uncomfortable. In 2 days of besieging the city, they lost nearly 20,000 soldiers. This result made Gao Yu somewhat dissatisfied. He called Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie again and asked them how confident they were in taking down the city. They were not as confident as they were 2 days ago. This time, the two of them were hesitant. Gao Yu knew that this was a sign of their lack of confidence, but he did not blame them. After all, it was not easy for them to achieve such a result on their first time leading an army. "In my opinion, we can't continue to lose soldiers like this. Tomorrow, we will use the firearms camp. After the cannons attack, the two of you will lead the army to attack. You should be able to achieve great results. How about it?" Hearing that they were going to use the firearms camp, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie were very excited. They immediately patted their chests and promised that they would be able to take down the city tomorrow. Gao Yu was naturally satisfied with the confidence of the two. He immediately gave the two of them 20,000 soldiers each as encouragement. Then, he called over the firearms camp's general, Wei Ke, and ordered him to immediately set up the formation and coordinate with the infantry to attack the city tomorrow. Wei Ke was Yang Guang's subordinate. Yang Guang was also the highest officer in the Bai Ming firearms camp that Yang Chendong had arranged. Of course, Wei Ke didn't know about this. He only remembered that General Yang Guan had told him not to weaken the firepower camp's prestige. He wanted him to put up a good show to show the military's might. Wei Ke, who listened to Yang Guang's words, held a torch and set up the cannons at night, making a lot of noise. On the top of the city wall, the scouts who were responsible for watching the Bai Ming army's every move naturally saw it clearly. They quickly reported it to the Logistics Command Commander Yang Si. "Oh, are we going to use the cannons?" "Pass down the order. Except for a small number of troops hiding in the safety of the city wall, all the main forces of the army will withdraw from the outer city to the inner city wall overnight." Yang Si, who was already prepared for this, passed down the order. Compared to the Bai Ming army's firearms camp, the 5-star army did not have any torches. Under the moonlight, they quietly withdrew from the outer city wall. The Bai Ming army, who was completely unaware of all this, prepared to bombard the outer city gate early in the morning the next day. Tens of thousands of Bai Ming army infantrymen were also waiting under the command of Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjie. Seeing that the morale of the army was so high, Gao Yu was full of confidence in his carriage. Following his loud shout, they began to attack. Chapter 13:27. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. As the cannons rumbled, several hundred explosive cannonballs landed on the city walls and gates of the southern city, causing a strange phenomenon as if an earth dragon had flipped over. The sound of the cannons went on for an hour. Looking at the tower of the South City, it was already full of holes. Even the South City gate had been blasted into pieces. The cave door was wide open, like a young girl who was open for anyone to take advantage of. Ha ha, charge! Seeing that the city gate had been broken, Li Keguang and Ho Xiangjia led the tens of thousands of soldiers excitedly, shouting as they charged forward. There were a few 5-star army soldiers lying in ambush on top of the South City tower. Because they had entered a safe zone in advance, they didn't suffer any losses. Seeing a large number of Ming army charging at them, they followed the plan and fired 2 volleys of arrows at the city gate tower. After killing and injuring several thousand Ming army soldiers, they quickly retreated. The South City tower changed hands. Taking this opportunity, the 2 generals led their troops to the east, west, and north respectively. After paying a certain price, they successfully occupied the outer city of the beginning city. The outer city was breached. When the news came, Gao Yu was naturally very excited. He waved his fists fiercely to vent the excitement in his heart. In the main tent, Li Keguang, Ho Xiangjia, and Wei Ke were standing together. Gao Yu looked at the 3 of them with appreciation and said with satisfaction, "You guys have done very well. This supervisor has already submitted a memorial to the Emperor regarding your performance. The reward should be coming soon. Many thanks to military supervisor for your promotion," the 3 generals said excitedly. "Very good. This military supervisor wants to tell you and the others that you will be rewarded for your contributions. You should work even harder. Now that we've taken the outer city, when can we take the inner city and attack the inner city? That's what we need to discuss today. If you have any suggestions, feel free to raise them." Gao Yu began to ask questions after a round of praise. After all, conquering and occupying the entire origin city was his goal. Conquering the outer city was just the first step. With the previous victory, the 3 generals were each more courageous than the other when it came to strategizing. After listening to the opinions of the 3 people, Gao Yu finally understood the opinions of the 3 people. That was, they still needed to increase the number of troops. The best plan was to take down the first city in one go with the advantage of a strong military force. Although the Ming army managed to capture the outer city with the help of the cannons, their losses were not small. Originally, there were 170,000 infantrymen. They could only win, not lose. This was his creed. Yang Qindong silently nodded. Although the mission was a bit difficult, if the new Second Army wanted to stand up again, they had to go through this kind of experience. Without looking back, Yang Qindong ordered again. 1 division of the new Second Army and 1 division of the Second Army. Make use of the advantage of the war horses to cut down the encirclement of the 80,000 infantrymen. This is to inflict heavy damage on the enemy and destroy their morale." "Yes." The 2 commanders, Shibi and Yoduo, immediately agreed, expressing that they would pass on the mission to their subordinate division commanders. At this point, Yang Qindong turned his gaze to the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu, who had been standing there like a pole but hadn't accepted a mission yet. When he saw Yang Qindong's gaze, Tian Hu straightened his back. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning was quite clear. "6th young master, if you have any difficult missions, leave them to us. We promise to complete them." "Commander Tian, 100,000 Ming Liaodong cavalry have disappeared from our line of sight. They might appear at any time. Your mission is to stop them from entering the battlefield and inflict as much damage as possible. This is a powerful enemy. Ming has invested a lot in them, and they have 5 times your number. Can you stop them?" When Yang Qindong asked this, he was also carefully observing Tian Hu's expression. Speaking of which, their mission was the most difficult. If they didn't handle it well, it was possible that the whole division would be wiped out. When he heard that they were finally going to face Ming's Liaodong cavalry, even though he knew that the other party had 100,000 soldiers, Tian Hu didn't show any fear on his face. On the contrary, there was only a rumbling fighting spirit. Sixth young master, don't worry. Our 1st Cavalry Division is not afraid of any opponent or enemy. No matter if they are weak or strong, as long as they face us, they will only be defeated. Good. Hearing Tian Hu's confident answer, Yang Chenong walked forward and patted his shoulder, then said, Your fighting spirit is commendable. But I still have to say that the opponent this time is not simple. You must not be careless. I have already sent a new group of soldiers. They will send people out of the city to help you. There is also a heavy cavalry regiment near the beginning city. If things go wrong, they will go to the beginning city and meet up with them to launch a counterattack. Remember, don't use loyalty in war, and don't use the lives of your soldiers as a stepping stone. When Tian Hu heard such sincere words, he once again stood at attention and said, Sixth young master, I will remember your words in my heart. Watch my performance. Well, I will watch your performance. Speaking of which, this king is preparing to expand the world's 1st Cavalry Division into an army. I hope that you can have the vision of a general. What this king wants is a general who can devise strategies, not a tiger general who can only charge into battle. Do you understand? This was the first time Yang Chendong talked about expanding the 1st Cavalry Division into an army in public. There wasn't any news about it before. So everyone was surprised after hearing it. The current 1st Cavalry Division already had 20,000 soldiers. Its combat strength was not something that any army could compare with. Now that he wanted to expand it, didn't that mean that its combat strength was close to that of a group army, or even surpassing them? There was no doubt that once it became an army, the value of a commander would definitely surpass that of other commanders. Even the power of a group army commander would be on par with that of a group army commander. After everyone understood this, they looked at Tian Hu with envy and a little jealousy. Tian Hu's face turned red. This meant that the 6th young master wanted to promote him. At the same time, it was also a kind of affirmation to the 1st Cavalry Division. He immediately stood at attention and said, Yes, 6th young master, please rest assured. Tian Hu is a wise general, not just a general who knows how to kill. Knowing that Tian Hu understood the meaning of his words, Yang Chendong patted his shoulder with satisfaction and said, Very good. Then I will watch your performance. Don't let me down. Yes, teacher. After feeling Yang Chendong's ardent expectations, Tian Hu changed the way he addressed him and called him teacher. This was to express in private that he would definitely complete the mission. The combat missions of the various troops had been completed. Yang Chendong's gaze wandered around the faces of the 3 military commanders, then he nodded and said, Well, I look forward to your performance. Let's set off now. Yes. After Tian Hu, Shi Bei, and Yo Duo saluted in unison, they turned and walked towards the troops. After watching the 3 of them leave, Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, came over and asked in a low voice, Young master, what are we going to do? Our 2,000 black cavalry has been itching for a fight. In this battle, the Baiming army sent 80,000 infantrymen out of the city, and there were 50,000 defending infantrymen in Tulu city who could come out at any time. In addition to the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry who had been wandering outside without a fixed residence, there were a total of 200,000 people. On the other hand, Yang Chendong only had 20,000 people from the 1st Cavalry Division, more than 20,000 people from the 3 divisions of the new 2nd Army, and more than 10,000 people from the 2 divisions of the 2nd Army. In total, there were only 60,000 people. The difference in strength was more than 3 times, but Beta Persei was not nervous at all. On the contrary, he was worried that the 2,000 black cavalry would have no battle to fight. It had to be said that he was very careless, but it also proved how much trust and confidence he had in Yang Chendong.